is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Donald Trump needs a weak dollar.
Have we achieved a soft landing? Has the Fed kind of done its job?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Fears over a broader regional war in the Middle East.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. We welcome you into a 2025. Paul Sweeney, let's get right to it. A fractured 2025 with terror and violence in America.
Yeah, exactly. New Orleans, Las Vegas, a lot of disturbing news there. But
and in New York, we had the report in Jamaica here just overnight.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you know, the New Year's Eve in New York City went off without a hitch, thanks to the NYPD and all those folks there, because there were a million people standing in the rain on New Year's Eve in Times Square.
We're going to focus on this. We're thrilled that Mick Mulroy will join us later in the hour on Homeland Security, our national response to this violence. David Gura was so good that, you know, he just wanted to stay around for Lisa's Greek pecan muffins.
Yeah,
delicious.
Exactly.
David Gura will join us here in a moment. We'll take a different tangent in the immediate news. We'll, of course, stay on the story through the morning. On the screen, it's simple. The dollar, when does the president-elect finally state the dollar's too strong? Do we get to Monday?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what you do about this dollar. It continues to surge higher, and why not? I mean, where else? The U.S. economy, U.S. exceptionalism, we see it in the economic data and we see it in the dollar.
This hour, Drew Mattis will join us. Ibrahim Rabari will join us. Peter Scheer will join us. We start strong here in 2025. Right now from the Interactive Broker Studios of Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got Wall Street set to rebound from a 4-day slump that marked the end of 2024. Right now we have NASDAQ futures up more than 1%, 244 points. Dow futures up 0.8%, 345 points. S&P futures up 0.9%, or 55 points. The 2-year yield 4.21%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.53%, that's down 4 basis points. Chinese stocks had their worst start to the year in nearly a decade. Stocks in China plunged 2.9%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index slid 2.2%. Over to currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, that is little change. We have the Japanese yen, little change. Euro down about 0.2%. British pound down about 0.5%. And we have Bitcoin up nearly 2% at just over 96,000. Speaking of which, Bitcoin buying software firm MicroStrategy up 5%. It tumbled in the last 4 trading sessions of 2024. And then you check in with Coinbase. Their stock also rose. It's up more than 4%. Finally, Tesla shares up more than 1.5%. This is ahead of new sales data. Now, meanwhile, Chinese rival BYD, they said it sold a monthly record of 440,000 plug-in hybrid and pure electric passenger vehicles in December. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. We just had a wonderful overview from Nathan Hager and David Gura on this moment of violence in America. We asked David to come back here. It was easy, you know, with Lisa's gluten-free, you know, pecan muffins or whatever they are. It was easy to get him back. But joining us now, someone that's actually studied our response to this domestic terror. David Gura joins us, of course, with a big take and all of his work on politics. He will attend in Washington the Carter funeral next week. David Gura, I go to the FBI and I see the Terrorist Screening Center. Is it more than just guys running around with blue jackets with yellow letters on the back? I mean, what are we actually doing to try to monitor terror within America?
Well, this is an agency or part of the FBI that was created after the attacks on September 11th to create and monitor that terrorist watch list, as it's commonly called. And I don't know if they're wearing blue jackets, but this is difficult and important work. And I think we're having a conversation right now about the future of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Kash Patel has been nominated by the president-elect to run it. This is serious business. The folks who work at this agency take their work seriously, and in an event like we saw, the events that we saw over the course of the weekend, put in stark relief just the importance of making sure that they're doing as much as they can to see who might be plotting something against the United States.
I mean, David's up to speed on this, Paul, but from where we are, these seem to be repetitive events. That's what concerns me, Paul.
Sure, absolutely, and every time it happens, it kind of reignites the defenses here. And David, what do we know from New Orleans about whether this was the act of a lone individual, or is it something part of a bigger conspiracy? Have they learned anything yet?
Over these last few hours, we've been paying attention to what we've heard from local law enforcement, both in New Orleans and Las Vegas and at the national level as well. And we're getting kind of mixed messages about that. President Biden saying this is being treated as a terrorist attack. We heard that from the Attorney General, the FBI as well. And there have been some suggestions made by law enforcement that there might be a connection here. I think we can safely say it's something that law enforcement is really probing right now. The fact that these came kind of back to back and were terrorist events, I think begs the question, was there some link here? And of course, as we've learned from the FBI, from that now dead suspect in New Orleans, there was an ISIS flag in the vehicle that he used in that attack. It certainly raises a lot of concerns and suggests perhaps that there is something broader here than just a lone attacker who made his way to New Orleans.
And it's just, you think about New Orleans, just one of the many parts around the world that really celebrates New Year's in a big way. Is there a concern here that maybe the local security wasn't as good as it could have been? I've seen, I think many of us have seen the video of him, this perpetrator evading the police cars to get in onto Bourbon Street.
Glad you bring that up, and I think a lot of us have been in New Orleans, to this very corner of the city, have made that turn from Canal onto Bourbon, so it's familiar. I think the focus right now is on these barriers that are in place at the end of that street, and we know that they malfunctioned, know that they were being replaced and changed ahead of the Super Bowl, which is scheduled to be played in New Orleans in February. We're seeing a disturbing trend here in these kinds of vehicle attacks, maybe less so in the United States, but have seen them in Europe and China recently as well. Yes, at the Christmas market there. So it's certainly something that I think will give a lot of people pause going forward here, but I was struck just looking at the coverage this morning out of New Orleans. Folks were back in the French Quarter last night, and of course that game that was postponed yesterday is scheduled to be played today.
With you're so up to speed on Washington, whether it's Germany or Copenhagen or Oslo or the United States, does there seem to be a police response to domestic people that are just floating around out there? That's all it is. That's all it's about, David.
I think we've talked a lot in recent years about the prospects of there being more domestic terrorism, and as I was saying just a few minutes ago, the focus here now is on who was this suspect, who did he talk to, what did he investigate, and I think at every level of law enforcement, at the FBI on down, it has been and will continue to be a huge focus here, trying to stop these attacks before they take place, Tom.
Studying this through the day, David Gura, of course, and look for the big take. I'm sure they'll address this today, just a superb 20-minute type podcast to inform. We are informed now by Drew Mattis of MetLife. We are thrilled that he is our first guest of 2025. Drew, to go back, there's a respect for what the dollar speaks. All the focus is on week this, week this, week this. Why is there strong dollar?
Well, I think it's because the people are expecting the policies that are going to be put in place in the incoming administration are going to be positive for growth. So whether it's a lower corporate tax rate, less regulation, I think is one that a lot of people are missing, where people are just expecting a regulatory environment that's much more friendly to businesses. And so you get a stronger dollar, I think, based on those. I mean, if you look at the rest of the world, they don't have these policies, and they all seem to be slowing down. And the U.S. seems to be, if not accelerating, at least doing better than most people.
Drew, inflation is one of the issues I think a lot of folks have kind of in the back of their minds that could be a headwind in 2025. The Fed has done arguably a pretty good job of bringing the rate of inflation down, but there's a concern that it may reignite in 2025. How do you think about that?
I think we're going to be in for a pretty sticky period of inflation, so I think it's going to be hard for the Fed to maneuver it lower, particularly since they're cutting interest rates. I mean, if they were really that concerned about inflation, they wouldn't be cutting rates. I do also think that there's maybe an overestimation of the importance of tariffs on inflation. Tariffs are going to be, potentially, if they get put in place, a one-time hit to inflation. They will fall out of the system over time. And of course, then if you look at the dollar strength, the dollar's rallied about 5% since the election. If you're putting in a 10% tariff and yet the dollar's gone up by 5%, all of a sudden, the impact on the U.S. consumer is a little less. And so, you have to, I think when we view everything in context, it all kind of makes sense. but a lot of it's predicated simply on the idea of a pro-business environment in the United States.
I look, Drew, at the dollar strength and say, okay, I'm focused on a stock market this morning, folks. NASDAQ bounces up 1.2% on futures. How do you link what foreign exchange says, Drew Mattis, into the pricing of equities, bonds, notes, and bills?
Well, I think if you're looking at it from a perspective of growth, or look, it's either growth or inflation or what have you. One of the reasons why credit has been doing so well is you have a positive growth story emerging, and you have sticky inflation, and of course, inflation makes it easier to pay back the debts that you've taken on, and so it's actually a credit positive event if you have a modicum of inflation, and so when you look at things in that perspective, all of a sudden, some of the movement that we're seeing makes a lot more sense. If you look at the behavior of risk assets, once that's kind of a growth story, and then you price in a higher growth story, and the potential for emerging technologies to actually boost U.S. productivity going forward, that all kind of contributes to a positive dynamic. If you take that positive growth story, positive productivity story, and project it into things like what that could mean for nominal GDP growth going forward, all of a sudden it makes potentially solving the U.S. deficit story a little easier, right? It doesn't kind of erase the issues that we face, but if you can generate pretty high levels of nominal GDP growth, largely coming from the real side of the economy, so how much we're actually building, then you can actually run higher deficits as long as your growth is above the deficit rate. And then you'll actually see that erode over time. So your deficit to GDP numbers will begin to come down. So first stop digging your hole, but then if you can get some productivity growth, you can actually maybe grow your way out of some of this.
Hey, Drew, we just finished 2 years where the equity markets provide greater than 20% returns for investors. As you start this new year, when you're talking to clients, how are you trying to set expectations for equity returns in 25?
Well, I mean, we're more of a fixed income firm here, but I think if we're looking at risk assets broadly, there's a lot of good news, but there's a lot of good news that's been priced in. And the risk is that there's some bad news that we're just not seeing somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we're going to continually get multiple multiple years like we've been seeing indefinitely. It's usually not the case. Usually parties come to an end. And if you look at the Bloomberg consensus on recession risk in the United States, for example, even though it's been coming down from being 2 times normal, it's still elevated. And I think that's a reasonable assumption.
I mean, Drew Mattis, I know you're a fixed income shop, but come on, we got to get an SPX call out of you for 2025. I need the general counsel worked up at MetLife. Can you give me a Standard & Poor's call 12 months out?
No, I'm sorry, I can't. I would defer to people like Neil Dutta and Julian Emanuel, people like that who know
people
more
that
about
you don't speak to because
do.
it's beneath you. I understand. Drew Mattis.
People I also worked with, so I trust it.
We'll stick with the actuarial assumption. Drew Mattis, thank you so much. With MetLife to get us started this year, some of the nuances there, and I'm not going to mince words about it, Paul. I'm watching FX. I just think there's something going on here more than just the DXY rounded up 109.
Yep, looking at the yen here, showing a little bit of strength, maybe. I'm sorry, the yen showing a little bit of strength, but still 157. We're almost near that 160 level.
We greet you across this nation this morning on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. The markets lift, but it is a more sober America on this January 2nd. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. U.S. stocks looking to snap a losing streak. It took some shine off the S&P 500's best two-year run dating back to the late 1990s. The index surged more than 50% since the start of 2023, and that was thanks to the Mag 7 tech mega caps. We'll check in with a few of them. We have Apple shares, little change. We have Microsoft up about 1%, and Alphabet up about 1%. Chip stocks advancing ahead of the opening bell after ending 2024 kind of on a downbeat note. We have NVIDIA up more than 1.5%, Broadcom up more than 2%, Advanced Micro Devices, they're up more than 1%. Let's get to NASDAQ futures up more than 1%, 263 points. Dow futures up 0.8%, 362 points. S&P futures up nearly 1% at 58 points. The two-year yield at 4.21%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.53%. That's down 4 basis points. Over to commodities, oil climbing. This is after an industry report showed U.S. crude stockpiles continue to shrink. Right now we have Brent crude at $75 a barrel, up more than 1%. WTI crude at $72 a barrel. And we have spot gold at $2,640 an ounce. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little changed, and Bitcoin up more than 2% at above 96,000. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Well, Lisa, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene, we welcome all of you, some of you commuting today, many of you tuning in at home. Thank you for tuning in on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Humbled by the first response we've had in this first year, 2024, and look to expand that this year. Again, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. First thing I did, Paul, when I got back, Paul slides in at like 5:52.
Sure, no rush.
6:52 to get ready. I was in early this morning and I met with our interns and I said, foreign exchange really matters this year. And I said, what do we got? And they said, we've got Ibrahim Rabari, and that's a good thing. Working with Willem Bouter and Catherine Mann at Citigroup. His shingles out now with Tina Fordham at Fordham Global Insight. Ibrahim joins us this morning. Ibrahim, I just don't buy this isn't about strong dollar. I've got the dollar, not a double, but I'm sorry, some real movement in the dollar over the last 10 years. It's not linear. At what point, on what measure, do you say the system not breaks, but adapts to a new, stronger dollar?
Well, it's certainly a very exciting time to be in foreign exchange. Happy New Year, first of all, for both of you, and a great way to start the year. I don't think we are right there at the point of breakage in global markets, but I think you're putting the finger right on a big point here. I think dollar strength right now obviously reflects that the U.S. economy is doing well, but it clearly also highlights that the rest of the world is doing pretty poorly. And I think we're going to be eyeing, the cycle highs, the decade highs in DXY 113, 115 are really not that far off at this point. And I do think that points to fragilities, both in terms of growth, but in terms of societies in the rest of the world as well.
In the last decade, a jump condition on BBDXY, the Bloomberg Dollar Index, a 30% appreciation of the dollar. President Trump squawked in the first term about too strong dollar. Will he squawk January 21st about too strong dollar?
I think he will. And I think it's very easy to do that in the current setup because the dollar is strong and he obviously wants to put pressure on the US's trading partners. But if he's really serious about weakening the dollar, there are really two things he can do. The first thing that are consistent with some of the things he's talked about in the campaign. The first thing is he tries to get serious about cutting the deficit, which obviously may not be quite compatible with some of the other things he has in store. The other, which is maybe more probable, is to put a lot more pressure on the rest of the world to increase domestic demand, including by spending more on defense, but maybe also in general by spending more on US goods. So I don't think there's much doubt about whether he will bring up the topic of dollar strength. What is really the open question is whether he's serious about it and actually will act on it.
Ibrahim, in your research, you say 2025 could be the year for, quote, peak everything, stock market, bond market, the dollar, so on and so forth. What could cause that peak to then turn over and go south?
So I would say there are many, many scenarios to keep in mind. And I think the beginning of the year is really the time to be open-minded. But if I had to put my finger on one specific scenario that I think is notable, is that there are a number of these big cycles that have been very strongly correlated. And that's ultimately about US exceptionalism. And that's reflected in the strong performance of the stock market, the strong performance of the US dollar. But again, it's all relative. So the underperformance of the rest of the world. So what that leads us to is, if there is a peak in the US stock market, and that peak could come simply because expectations have run sufficiently high, or because something goes wrong, as the previous speaker said, then I think that would this time around be very likely to also bring about a turn in some of these other big discrepancies, which is the record interest rate differential between the US and the rest of the world, or the record high value of the dollar. Right. So I think the equity market will be especially interesting over the rest of the year, and I personally don't see much upside.
Renminbi through the new week. Yeah, renminbi through the new weakness, Ibrahim, 7.30 on yuan. That's really quite a weak move. Is that the solution for the leadership in Beijing? Is they're going to solve their domestic problems through currency depreciation?
Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the solution for a variety of reasons. But I think the primary one is it's simply too large an economy in a relatively stagnant global economy to be able to export its way out of its troubles. And we should keep in mind, of course, that Chinese export performance has already been very strong over the last several years. So I don't think it'll be a way out of its trouble right now. It's really just a symptom of Chinese weakness, which is mostly domestic. And then you heap onto it, of course, the looming addition to trade tensions with the US. So a weak renminbi makes a lot of sense, but I don't think it will lead China back towards strength over time. That will require more stimulus.
Ibrahim, what do you expect the U.S. Federal Reserve to do in 2025? I mean, as recently as 6 months ago, the market seemed to be pricing in, 4, 5, 6 cuts. Now I think it's maybe 2 cuts. How do you think this U.S. Federal Reserve is going to behave in 2025?
So I think what happened in December and in the run-up to it was really interesting, because I think we've seen a hawkish recalibration from the Fed. They sort of changed the burden of proof. And I think that's very significant, particularly for risk assets and the equity market. So up until then, the Fed basically told us no news means we can support the economy, we can keep it in a good place by cutting. Whereas now they mentioned 2 things. One is they mentioned we're significantly less restricted than we were. So no news doesn't mean a whole lot right now. But very importantly, they also effectively told us they are concerned about upside risks going forward. And that's obviously tied to some of the potential administration policies. So it means even if you get kind of gray macro data coming in, right, they will still be worried of potentially inflationary policies down the road. So it makes them potentially significantly more hesitant to cut rates in the face of weakness, and that'll be a negative. Right. But that leaves me right now for a prediction is I have them cutting again in June, but it could be not at all this year. And therefore, I will put myself on the hawkish side of the debate. But it's a very open macro environment, so we don't want to rule out anything. But I certainly would be surprised if they don't.
Ibrahim, don't be a stranger. We'd love to get you and Tina on at the same time with Fordham Global Insight here. If you're both in New York or something like that, let's make that work in 2025. Ibrahim Rabari with us here on Foreign Exchange. Can't say enough how I'm just radared on it. Put out on Twitter and LinkedIn, Michael Rosenberg's classic book on currency forecasting. If you can find it, Paul, on eBay or Amazon, it's like $200.
Really?
Yeah, it's like a collector's item. All right. And it's still great. Good morning, Michael Rosenberg and all at Bloomberg FX who have made the terminal such a great bed. Paul, you know all the functions. I don't.
Sure, yeah.
I know
there's
FXC.
28,000 of them, I think.
Yeah, but there's like
crazy.
foreign exchange functions.
Yeah, exactly. We have that one button there.
We'll have to see. Right now, we have barely talked about it. We got a lift to the market here after, OMG, we ended 2024. We were down, 4 days in a row?
Exactly.
Oh, it's terrible.
Sell down.
Up 1.2% on NASDAQ 100. SPX up a stick right now, up 1% as well. Good morning on your commute. Not much commute today. You're sliding into the weekend.
Yes.
Sliding
it's
into
Thursday. I mean, it feels like a Monday, but it's
Lions,
Thursday.
Vikings, football. Is Barr scheduled to be with us Monday?
That's to be determined, I think, depending upon how this plays out.
We'll have to see. Anyways, on your commute, on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out of YouTube. It's a holiday gift,
Keeps giving.
for your fam. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures advancing. This is on the back of optimism over tech stocks. Right now, NASDAQ futures up more than 1%, 255 points. Dow futures up 0.8%, 359 points. We have S&P futures up nearly 1%, 58 points. The two-year yield, 4.22%. That's down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.53%, and that's down 4 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little changed. Economic data picks back up after the holiday. U.S. mortgage rates, well, they climbed to an almost 6-month high during the Christmas holiday week. According to the MBA, the contract rate on a 30-year mortgage advanced 8 basis points to 6.97%. Now, because of that, its index of home purchase applications, well, that slid to the lowest level since mid-November. There's more ahead today. An hour from now, we get initial jobless claims. That's followed later by manufacturing PMI and construction spending. Then tomorrow, a report on ISM manufacturing and light vehicle sales. Few companies making news. That's Alibaba. It's agreed to sell its controlling stake in Chinese hypermarket operator, that's Sun Art Retail Group. It's a $1.7 billion deal. Alibaba down about 1% in Hong Kong. Sun Art, though, that stock slid about 20%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney, I screen grabbed this. I think it's Charles de Gaulle. I thought of you. I think this is some Torsten Slot. Can't remember. In fact, only about 4 million existing homes were sold last year, the lowest since 1995. Do you see price cuts?
I do not. Not in. But
Yeah.
we talked to some real estate people in the last couple of days, and in certain markets, like Florida, for example, some of the markets that
Yeah,
have
out
been
west.
so strong for so long post-pandemic, they're starting to see a little bit of a pullback here. So, but it's just, if you're sitting on a 3 or 4% mortgage, you sell your house, you go buy something new, you downsize, whatever it is, your mortgage is going to cost you 6.5%, 7%, and for a lot of people,
It's a huge constraint.
yeah.
We'll have to see. Joining us now in this great hour, Drew Mattis on the Ibrahim Obari. Now Peter Cheer joins us. Thrilled that he could give us a brief this morning with Academy Securities. Peter, we talked about the housing market, and it's not illiquid, but it's odd. Are the equity markets odd, Peter Cheer?
I think the equity markets are very odd. One thing that really struck me over the course of last year is this rise of single stock leveraged ETFs, right? You see things like MSTX, which is a double leverage thing on MSTR. I'm not sure where that's playing out. Right now, I saw there's a huge amount invested in long leveraged stock ETFs. I think that's a danger for this market.
So, Peter, you could argue there's a lot of headwinds out there, but the fact is we've got a Fed that's cutting rates, maybe not as much as we thought. Earnings growth is looking to be pretty solid in 2025. What could trip up maybe the equity markets here? Let's just focus on the equity markets here. What could trip up the equity markets in 2025?
I think it could come out of D.C., right? I think right now, coming into the year end, we are all very comfortable. You have Trump, a lot of plans that he has would be good for markets. Musk, seemingly the same. Will they get agreement? Will they stay in agreement? And will they actually get things done? I think that's going to be the question that could rattle markets a little bit. And then the problem goes back to the way this market trades was so much dependent on ETFs, so much on the indices, which are now very concentrated in 10 names. The potential for outflows to create negative momentum is real. And I do think we see this a bit last year. You have these steady grinds higher with sharp, fast drops. And you've got to try and figure out how to avoid some of those sharp, fast drops.
You say in your notes there, Peter, that 2025 you think will be quote unquote messy. What's messy mean for financial markets?
I think we get comfortable. Okay, Trump right now, for example, everyone has decided, these tariffs with China are just a negotiating standpoint. It'll all work out. Well, with Trump, if he get comfortable, he tends to then up the ante. So look for noise that pushes that, again, takes people out of their comfort zone.
Right.
Also, I think he's learned a lot from his past negotiations, so I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as simple and straightforward as the market's currently pricing in.
I'll editorialize here. I agree strongly. I think there's way too little discussion. I'm sure you're having this, Peter, at Academy Securities, that the Trump of 2025 is not the Trump of the first month, the first time around. He's even said that. In what way is the president-elect different for markets now versus 8 years ago?
So one, he definitely seems more organized, right? He has staff on board. He's trying to fill the seats very quickly. So that's very different, right? He kind of ran it a little bit as a one-man show the first time around.
Sort of like what
So I think,
former President Carter did. I mean, there's an equivalence there.
yeah, and I think that's actually probably very good for markets. On the other side, I think he feels cheated by Xi through the first tariff negotiations. China never came and bought the ag products that they promised. So I think he's going in with a much tougher stance towards Xi than the market expects or realizes.
How about on the fixed income space, Peter? Here, I mean, I'm not sure whether this 10-year bond is going to go to 4% or 5%. We're sitting here right here at 4.5%. I don't know where it's going. Well, what's your call on the bond market here?
So I think it goes higher. We had 440 to 460 as our range coming into year end, and we've upped that now. I think it's going to be more like 475 we get to, maybe 480. Partly is, I think almost everything we're talking about is going to increase the deficit. People are starting to worry about that. I do think some of our behavior and political comments against, other countries don't help when they're such big buyers of treasuries. And then you should see a really big issuance month on the corporate side in January, which should also put some pressure on treasury yields as so much money is going to get taken out of the fixed income market by that corporate debt issuance.
Tell me about that, the corporate debt issuance. I mean, I've been waiting. I've been wrong on this, Peter. Cheers. This the year where like big tech says, OMG, let's go, let's issue debt?
One thing I think that we're going to see debt rolling over, right? A lot of people who issued 2 to 5 year paper during the pandemic, some of that has to roll over. People have to do their funds. So that's going on. What I think could be really interesting for the bond market is if you see a real return of M&A, right? Everyone's been talking about the potential of M&A for the stock market, but that could create a lot of issuance as you see some of these, high quality investment grade companies decide to lever up and take advantage of, potentially looser M&A rules.
How about credit, Peter? How much credit risk do you think investors should be taking here in 2025? Because again, you considered a 2-year treasury at 4.2%. That's not a bad living.
Yeah, I think you can take a fair bit of credit risk. When I look at the front end and the safer companies, they have better governance than the U.S. government, right? These companies are well aware of what they have to do to maintain credit ratings. They are very careful about that. So I think you're actually picking up, I don't want to say free money because that's always dangerous, but I think for high quality investment grade, that additional spread you're getting, you should take that. It's easy to get. I like it. They're well governed. And then if you look at the bottom end of credit, it gets a little bit risky and dicey, except that right now I think you have banks competing to lend. You have private credit competing to lend, right? Because banks underinvested in credit post Silicon Valley Bank, right? They were very concerned about their balance sheet. They're out lending. I think it's going to be a positive environment for credit spreads.
This is really, really important, folks. So we all talk yield. That's what the street talks, even guys, animals like Peter Scheer. I'm sorry, it's about price. What do you and Academy Securities make about the bid to keep spreads tight, price up, yield down, or the shocking price up in China when you look at a 10-year China generic, which is popping a 160 this morning?
Yeah, that's definitely, eye-popping, right? It's telling us, I think, that everyone's very worried about two things. One, the state of the Chinese economy, which we agree with. But I think people are saying they're very disappointing on what they've done in stimulus so far. I would look for that stimulus to increase. I think, at Academy Securities, we view that Xi and the Communist Party need this economy to turn around. If they don't get the economy to turn around, it could threaten either Xi and or the Communist Party. So they will do more and more stimulus this year because they have no other solution if they want to stay in charge.
Well, given that background, I mean, I'm looking at the Bloomberg Dollar Index. I mean, it's had such a rip since, kind of late September here. I'm not sure that's what President-elect Trump wants. How do you guys think about the dollar, given what you just said about China and some of these other economies out there?
I think it's made sense that we've had the strong dollar. One, our yields are, generally higher than the rest of the world. The economy has been doing better. You look at Europe, I would love to say, I like Europe, except every time Europe's done well, it's really been on the back of Germany doing well. Germany is just struggling right now. So I think the strong dollar can continue for a little while longer. So again, I think that's a great example. If Trump doesn't want a strong dollar, look for him to talk it down. And that's, I think, what I term, messy.
Peter, we're starting with you. Peter from Connecticut just emailed in and said, Tom, lose the beard. For those of you on Bloomberg Radio, it's like mon beard. It's like
you were
it's a
just
French
back from
thing.
Paris. We understand.
Smoking jetons in the cafe in the black.
I'm surprised you're not smoking here in the studio.
Peter Scheer, should I lose the beard? What do you think? Should we make it a fixture?
I like it. I still don't have the guts to wear a bow tie. That's maybe one of my goals for 2025 is show up with a bow tie.
Well, I showed up with a beard, and I'm already getting love notes from Peter in Connecticut. Thank you for that love note this morning. Peter Shear, thank you for getting. What a great hour. Can we do this every hour all year?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ibrahim Rabari, Drew Mattis, Peter Shear.
Yep, solid
we
effort.
finish with Mateo. Massive acclaim from Mateo newspapers.
Yep. Got to bring it back to 2025.
I get emotional.
Yep, sure.
Lions Vikings Sunday.
Must watch.
It's too much. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Joe Biden says the U.S. Army veteran who drove a pickup truck into a crowd of New Year's revelers in New Orleans had posted videos to social media hours before the carnage saying he was inspired by ISIS and expressed a desire to kill. The driver killed 15 people as he steered around a police blockade and slammed into revelers before being shot dead by police. President Biden says the FBI is investigating the early Wednesday attack.
The law enforcement and intelligence community are continuing to look for any connections, associations, or co-conspirators.
Investigators found guns and what appeared to be an improvised explosive device in the vehicle, along with other devices elsewhere in the French Quarter. A Tesla Cybertruck exploded into a fireball right outside the entrance to the Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas. Authorities treating this as a possible act of terrorism. Authorities say the Tesla Cybertruck pulled up in front of the Trump International Hotel in Vegas and less than 20 seconds after parking it, exploded. This was no accident, according to Las Vegas police. Sheriff Kevin McMahill describes what was found in the Cybertruck.
Gasoline canisters, they are camp fuel canisters, and large firework mortars.
The driver was killed in the blast, and 7 other people who were nearby suffered minor injuries. President Joe Biden will present lawmakers Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson with the Presidential Citizens Medal, honoring the leaders of the congressional committee that probed the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol just weeks before Donald Trump is set to reclaim the presidency. In a statement today, the White House cited Cheney and Thompson's stewardship of the panel that investigated attempts to overturn the 2020 election, including when supporters of then-President Trump overran the Capitol. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much.
You looking handsome.
My
there.
stylist dressed me in Paris. You know?
All right. You got the hat.
I got the bro thing going.
Well, you're sitting at the outdoor cafes is what Lisa and I were.
Having a chiton. And,
of course.
Reading Le Monde. And,
yep. People watching in
Paris. It's like,
You spent an afternoon.
My stylist said, you got to go to the bro thing. I said, I don't want to go. She says, Pharaoh wears it. You might as well wear it too. So,
okay. I think it works.
I think I need a Lions. You think I need a Lions cap to get through the weekend?
Now you style it.
Now we're styling. Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be a real game here.
Oh,
big time.
I apologize in advance if you're going to hear some sorry newscast Monday morning.
Well, we know
I got to watch that Sunday night. This is going to be, oh my goodness.
How good are the Vikings, sir? I'm not.
They're very good.
This is like a real game.
Oh, this is going to be huge. Whoever loses is going to be a 14-win team playing a wild card game.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Playing a wild. Wow.
Yeah.
That's how strong the NFC North is.
Right.
Is Green Bay out of it now?
No, they're in there.
And the question for the Vikings is, what do they do at quarterback?
Yeah.
Do they re-sign this guy to a long-term contract, Sam Darnold, who got run out of New York, or do they take their first-round pick from last year?
I got 32 seconds left. Penn State.
Yeah.
They beat Boise.
Well, here's the problem with the playoff system. It's a good system, but they have to tweak it because Penn State has played SMU and Boise State as their first 2 games. They have yet to play a real team. Now they're going to play a real team next round. Either the winner, Notre Dame or Georgia. But I mean,
delayed from the.
It's just kind of strange. Yeah. So Dan Ives, thanks to social media, we know he was out there.
He flew in.
Yeah, he was just.
I said, "Did you take the surveillance golf stream?" And he said, "No, Francine had it."
Okay, well, I'm sure he's got a little Penn State action going.
He's good,
So he was out there.
Well, Dan Ives, I think, scheduled Monday on Mag 7, and really, what app? Forget about NVIDIA. What Apple's done this year as well. Futures up 49. Bloomberg's surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have futures higher as we kick off the new year. We have NASDAQ futures up more than 1%, 222 points. Dow futures up 0.7%, 310 points. And S&P futures up 0.8%, or 49 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.22%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.52%, and that's down 4 basis points. Over to commodities, Brent crude up more than 1% at $75 a barrel. WTI crude $72 a barrel. We have spot gold higher at $2,646 an ounce. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.1%. Few stocks on the move. Unity Software, they're up about 13%. A block of 1.32 million shares in the video game toolmaker. Well, it was traded at a market value of $29.7 million on Tuesday night. And shares of Top Golf, Callaway, you know them, rose up more than 8% this morning. This is after an upgrade from Jefferies to buy from hold. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Box office, and I don't know what to make of this. I mean, you know, there was last year Barbie and Oppenheimer.
Sure.
And I look here, Gladiator 2 is number 13, Box Office Mojo. It's brought in $163 million. Is that a failure or a success, Paul Sweeney?
I don't, you know, it's kind of right in the middle there. I mean, we'll see how it does overseas going forward. But I mean, you know, I think it had some buzz there for a while, but it's not going to be like a Gladiator 3's, you know, now going to be greenlit right now. So I think they're probably going to step back and take a look at this thing. I mean, you know, anything over $100 is good, but you know, we'll see how it plays globally. That's a big question.
I mean, Twisters, I mean, Lisa said that was emotional.
Yep.
$267 million.
Wow.
For Twisters.
Okay.
I mean, you know, it's just.
What about Red One? Red One? No,
Red One.
It's not up there?
It's next weekend. It'll top tick 100 million. It ain't working. That's from Amazon, it says.
That's okay, though. That's all right.
And when they have a movie that stiffs, does it affect the conference call the next quarter?
No, not at all.
Some wise guy's going, hey, Bob, great quarter. How about that Red One?
No, like when Avatar was the first movie to go like $1 billion, didn't even move the needle for 21st Century Fox.
Really?
Yeah, nobody cares. Because it's just, you know.
Unbelievable.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
And we say good morning from the major publications division. It is the Lisa Mateo Hour. She survived New Year's Eve and joins us this morning.
All right, I have our top story. French President Emmanuel Macron made his New Year's speech. I'm going to shake it up right now. I want to go to Paris correspondent Tom Keene and see how everything was in Paris.
He called Mrs. Keene at CDG and said about half of the French people, thank you. It's the oddest economy. There's a group, a couple called Les Frenchies, who do videos on YouTube about where to go eat so you're not a tourist. So we went one arrondissement outside of what's basically America in the middle of Paris, near the old Bastille.
Okay.
You know, Bastille Day and all that, to a wonderful restaurant called Beaufranger, which is like the real Paris. And it's totally different than what you experience in the nexus of America East in the middle of Paris.
So how are the consumers feeling there? Because
I think the French people are flat on their back. Witness the politics of Mr. Macron.
Yeah.
The observation is the consumption of their tourist trade is unbelievable. I saw one statistic, I don't have it in front of me. On the margin, 85% of new jobs in France in the last 5 years have been tourist-based.
Wow.
Okay.
So there's like this Disneyland of America, you know, around Notre Dame and all that, out to the Eiffel Tower and all that. But then the moment you get outside that, it's the France that Macron has to deal with.
So it's like going down to the village or going, you know, going up to uptown versus just hanging into
Can I do a
square.
shout out?
Yeah.
Yes.
Air France just killed it.
Oh,
Just
okay,
killed
good for
it.
them.
Just they're real competition for the domestic carriers. We'll have to see. Next, what do you got?
How is your French? Très bien.
Mon français, c'est terrible. The Uber driver, I said, où est la bibliothèque? And he took us to the library at work. What do you got?
Okay. A Rolex, if you have any plans to buy one.
No.
It's going to cost you more. So I just wanted to let you know they raised prices, some of its most popular models, Gold value surged in 2024, so they kicked off the new year. They hiked prices about 8% on some models. It's not new. I mean, Rolex usually raises prices once a year on January 1st, but this increase is larger than last year's. So it's going to cost you a little more. How much?
Tough to get, though.
I know. So here's an example. So you have the yellow gold day date with a 40 millimeter black dial.
Okay.
It'll cost just over $45,000. Okay, and that is up from $42,000 from the year before. That's according to their website. But it's a pretty penny.
You know, when I was in the market for that type of watch years and years ago, I really did look at the Rolex, but the value proposition just was not.
So you
there
never
for
got
me.
it. You never
so
had
I got
a
an
Rolex.
Omega, and for me, that value proposition felt better. So, but I
that's
looked
what
long and
cash
hard.
flow wants.
I looked long and hard.
Cash flow. Cash flow's my oldest son. Cash flow wants an Omega like astronaut watch.
Yeah.
I looked at the price. I said, "You're kidding me."
They're half the Rolex, though, and I kind of feel like I'm getting more value. That's kind of what I felt.
So your basic take is you walk out of the store, the Rolex, and it goes down right away.
No. In fact, they hold values
value.
of Rolexes and other premium watches, including Omega. I mean, we have on the Bloomberg terminal a watch index.
Can you see me in a Yachtmaster titanium?
Sure.
I don't think so.
Absolutely.
Next.
In Paris.
This one is in the Wall Street Journal. This is actually interesting. So a real estate developer in Los Angeles testing out this new blueprint for affordable housing. They're stacking apartments on top of a Costco. Okay, so bear with me here. Okay, it's Thrive Living. They want to begin construction early 2025, 800 units, affordable housing complex in South Los Angeles. Rooftop pool, fitness center, 184 apartments.
Looks okay. Looks good.
So
Free hot dogs?
No, you don't get the free hot dogs. But here's why they're saying it's going to work. Because the rent that Costco pays Thrive will help the developer rely less on government subsidies for the affordable housing. And then Costco stands to gain more customers. So they're saying it's a win-win for everyone. Okay. But it started this shift because the big box retailers are usually in suburban areas, right? Where you have the room. You can have the big parking lot, the big warehouse. But now they're doing a little smaller stores, not as big, like Target, Whole Foods. They do it. They have the apartments.
Target has a store on 86th Street, and it's not that big, right?
Right. They're smaller, more compact, but it works for the city. So they're trying to get these big box retailers more into the city. Because I remember David Gura was saying, where you got to go for the Costco.
Well, he's in hip of Brooklyn.
He's in the hip of Brooklyn.
Yeah,
but it's a new thought to put affordable housing on top of these.
Gotta get creative.
Gura spends $40 for a pizza.
Exactly.
Takes the kids out, and it's got whole wheat from I don't know, Kazakhstan or something. Next, what do you got?
Last one. Not sure what you're watching on TV, what you've been watching
one.
streaming. Okay, but season 2 of Netflix's survival series Squid Game. Yes. Topped the charts globally, despite having some mixed reviews. Some people liked it, some people didn't. 68 million views since it debuted December 26th. It's also the biggest debut ever for a Netflix original show. It's a big moneymaker for them. I mean, the first season generated $900 million in value for Netflix after it debuted in 2021. Yeah. And season 3, if you wanted it or not, it is coming, and it's going to be next year. I have not been into the Squid Games. I don't know.
Joe Uri's killing it as Kim Jin-hee. I mean, her low-life boyfriend lost money in crypto or something, so she's been sucked into the Squid Games. It's tragic.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, she looks like one of the K-pop girls, too. So, it works.
It's a bit gruesome, but
have you watched?
I have not watched it. My husband was watching Silo last night on
Love it.
Apple
Love
TV.
Silo.
Yes,
Love
he was
Silo.
watching it. He has a month to do it because it cancels.
Yeah. Oh,
it was only a 3-month free trial, so that's going to cancel. But I heard
you're going to forget about it, and then
Silo.
it's going to start hitting your credit card.
I know.
It's beautifully shot, and Tim Cook went out and did a thing with a lead actress, Rebecca Ferguson, I believe. He's such a fan of the show, and you wonder how much Cook is driving what is on Apple TV. Basic idea, though, is nobody watches Apple TV, right?
They don't have too much. I feel like they don't have too much. That's why I never got it. I just got the free trial because I feel like there's not much to offer on it. But apparently this show really good.
I'm going to tear up. Your first newspapers for 2020,
Exactly.
it was strong.
First Amendment, very
She
good.
started strong.
Yeah,
Lisa
absolutely.
Mateo, thank you so much for the newspapers. What do? You consider 2025. Ringo will be 85 this summer. Sir Paul will be 83 this summer. Timeless, the Beatles.
Now these days are gone, I'm not so self-assured. Now I find I've changed my mind.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What do you say to people scared stiff in cash?
We've got an administration, presumably, that will be pro-business, lower taxes.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. We say good morning across the nation. I sort of kind of like it's Thursday, right?
It is Thursday.
It's a Thursday commute, I say. On Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Good morning on Sirius XM, channel 129. I way underestimated the impact of Sirius XM. It's like a big deal.
Channel 121, absolutely.
It's like larger than large. And we say good morning on YouTube. All sorts of plans for us in 2025 to make the YouTube experience work. You subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Humbled by the growth this year. We continue to grow that out. We call it, I learned this, one of our advisors, we $10,000 a day comes in. Discoverability.
Discoverability, okay.
Discoverability is the new, like when you're hanging out with Rich Greenfield or Michael Nathanson or
smart
Moffat,
people.
You're supposed to impress them by saying, we at Surveillance, we're worried about discoverability.
Working on that. Okay. That could be a 2025.
Our discoverability is to have smart conversations with guests. Coming up, we will speak to a gentleman with 3 decades with a Central Intelligence Agency on this terror, this violence in America. Futures lift up 47. Dow futures up a large 300. NASDAQ up a stick right now, 1%. The VIX settled there, 17.15 as well. With our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got Wall Street set to rebound from the 4-day slump that marked the end of 2024. We'll start with the NASDAQ futures up more than 1%, 210 points. Dow futures up 0.7%, 303 points. S&P futures up 0.7%, 46 points. The 2-year yield at 4.21%, down 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.52%, down 5 basis points. Chinese equities tumbled after the release of bearish economic data. We have stocks in China plunged 2.9%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index, that slid 2.2%. Over to currencies, we have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.1%. The Japanese yen is little changed. The euro down about 0.5%. British pound down 0.8% at 124.14 against the dollar. And we have Bitcoin up more than 2% at just above 96,000. It's extending its rally to a 3rd day. Now, meanwhile, you have Bitcoin buying software firm MicroStrategy up 3% after it fell in the last 4 trading sessions of 2024. And Coinbase stock also rose up more than 4%. Tesla shares are up 1.5% ahead of new sales data. Meanwhile, Chinese rival BYD, they sold a record number of electric and hybrid vehicles in December, lifting full-year sales by 41%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Michael Barr giving us updates on all of this violence across America. And for those of you nationwide in New York City overnight, even some violence in Jamaica, in New Orleans, in Las Vegas. David Gurr has been following this for us carefully. And what we wanted to do was get some people with real-world experience. Jack Devine, with 32 years with the Central Intelligence Agency, he's written about it more on an international perspective and joins us this morning. Jack, honored that you're with us. You have a global CIA perspective. Does the FBI have the same acuity looking for the bad guys of terror in America that you had abroad?
I think that's a great question. I don't know if anyone knows the answer, but the FBI is really very strong at home. I mean, their ability to penetrate groups and collect information, use their powers and authority. When they leave the United States, then they're just like anyone else. It's very hard to do things in an overt way. So I think we're much stronger, and I think our ability to have sources everywhere, and I think things have improved very much between the FBI and the CIA. So it's not as if it's all compartmented.
My book of the year, at least a decade ago, Garrett Graff, we're efforting Mr. Graff for this conversation on the FBI. Jack Devine, does the CIA and the FBI, do they coalesce information daily to try to find bad guys like the guy in New Orleans?
I think it goes 24/7, all right? Now, the problem in this case is they didn't even have criminal records, right? So you don't know. I mean, it's it's an ocean full of fish, if you will. So but their abilities and the speed with which we cover information, and AI in general is mind-blowing when you start to look at it. So the capabilities are rich, but it's the proverbial needle in the haystack, right? So all those that are sort of institutionalized, really organized by ISIS, they probably have a really good fix on that. But when you get to those that are inspired, hell, it could be anybody on a mountaintop who gets inspired, and it's really hard. But I think we're really in a much stronger position than we were, say, at the time of 9/11. No comparison.
Hey, Jack, President-elect Trump will be sworn in January 20th. Presumably shortly thereafter, he'll receive his first CIA briefing. What do you think the CIA is going to present to him in terms of priorities?
Well, he's been in the office before, right? So he knows the drill. He knows the capabilities. You don't have to sit down and say, let me explain that this is the presidential's daily brief. This is how it's collected. So I think first day he'll walk in the room. Actually, the president will be briefed substantially before he's sworn in. And it'll be closing gaps and filling in the new information. But, it's not like being president. Next thing you know, you turn around, you have a terrorist incident, and they almost are always required instantaneous information, new information. So my guess is they'll be bringing him the latest news that was on the major issues around the world that happened the night before. So you're right up to speed to the moment. It'll probably be a long session and probably include more than one briefer.
Jack Devine, 3 days of a condor is what we were weaned on. Sidney Pollack, the giant. What an honor to make his acquaintance. 3 days of a condor was what we were weaned on, and there's all the modern CIA movies starting with a lot of techno whiz-bang. What do you think when you watch the modern CIA movies? What does Jack Devine think of those movies?
Well, I once had a conversation with Sean Connery about it, right? I made a mistake, though. I mentioned the Queen, and he told me immediately why. I'm a monarchist. But beside that, we talked about it, and I said, for years I diminished the importance of the movies, and then I realized everybody's thought the CIA people were omnipotent, were dashing and handsome, and that's not the case, Tom. But my point is, one of the things that I think are really interesting is many of the movies are a few years ahead, like the one Jason Bourne. And in Bourne, the technology was there, but it wasn't integrated, right? But when it was revisited, Jason Bourne, the material had been integrated. So there's a lot to learn from the technology. They bring in a lot of advisors. So television, it depends on the type and the quality of the program. The good ones really, particularly on technology, are good. It's the romantic part, and it's the CIA is bumping off people without all that junk, Hollywood junk. But if you look at the just core pieces of how things are done, it's pretty close.
Jack Devine, don't be a stranger. Thank you so much. Thank you for your public service to the nation. Mr. Devine out with a number of books. I'll get one of those out on Twitter, LinkedIn here in a moment. Esteemed and waiting with his cello or viola or bass violin. At Duke is a perfect. He gave you a quality C you snuck out with?
I got a solid P there, and I am very proud of that back in the day. 20 P's equals 60 G's is what we said back in the day. Campbell Harvey joins us, professor of finance at the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University. Professor, I'm looking at your yield curve. I think it's uninverted, as I remember you teach me back in the day. So we've got a steepening yield curve. What does that tell me?
Finally, after 25 months, the yield curve, which is defined as the 10-year yield minus the 3-month Treasury bill yield, that is normalized, meaning that the short rate is lower than the long rate. So it's been a long time. And it's kind of interesting to me that if you look at the last 4 recessions, that the yield curve uninverted before the recession actually began. And the average lead time is about 5 months. So that's kind of the situation. Many people thought, oh, well, the yield curve's inverted, but we don't have a recession. But if you look at the data, the recession happens after the yield curve uninverts.
So if that's in fact the case, how do you think the Fed will proceed in 2025? I mean, boy, 6 months ago, the market was discounting, 4 or 5 rate cuts this year. Now I kind of feel like it's maybe just a couple. What do you think the Fed's going to do in 25?
So if you look at their forecasts, is well known that they've kind of revised the number of cuts. And I think that this is very dangerous for the economy. So the rate should not be where it is, given the inflation that we're experiencing right now. So they need to do multiple cuts this year. And really what's factored in is like 2, and it should be more like 5, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We should be at 3.5%. There's no reason not to be at 3.5%. And when you keep the rate so high for so long, you are like really gambling with the economy, because we know that high rates are bad for economic growth.
Kim Harvey, I am having a great joy of reading Ned Phelps' new book out of Columbia. It's not an autobiography, but it's a walk through all of the experiences of the Nobel laureate's life. And I thought of you, because he leads in the intro with his more modern concept of a flourishing America where our intellectual effort feeds on itself into a greater productivity. Is that what we have going on in the United States now? A flourishing America, at least for some?
I don't think so. Indeed, we put ourselves in a really awkward position, to say the least, with $35 trillion of debt, with the interest payments on the debt near $1.2 trillion a year, and a structural deficit where the deficit is $2 trillion a year at a time where the stock market's at a record high, unemployment is low, and it doesn't make any sense. So we've handcuffed ourselves for the future. We will not have that flexibility. And we need to deal with the structural deficit and the debt. And tough choices will have to be made. Right. So this is a time of great risk. And the Fed is definitely not helping us, because holding the rate so high is holding back economic growth. And we need that economic growth to increase tax revenues, to decrease that deficit at least somewhat. There's tough choices that need to be made, but we need to deal with it.
Too short a visit. We'll have to do this again. What do we have to do? Was there a big Duke basketball game coming up? Like
football.
Football?
Football. They're in a bowl game, dude. So
Duke is in a bowl game?
Against Ole Miss tomorrow.
They just write the check out to Cam Harvey, don't
exactly,
they? Okay.
Right.
Professor Harvey, thank you so much at Fuqua, Duke University. They're in a bowl game?
They are. They're going up against Ole Miss. So this is a real team. They're like a 2-touchdown underdog, but we're there. We're there. Okay. And the basketball team, I'm saying it right here, I think they can win a national championship.
Did you watch the Cheez-It Bowl?
I did. I watched them all.
You did?
But Duke Hoops, watch out this year.
Okay, here we go. There it is. Get the tape rolling, Ken. There it is, a quote from Sweeney on Duke basketball. We will attend March Madness with full team coverage when we get out to that. Ned Phelps says that one of the major constraints of his flourishing America is his debt and deficit. That's something we'll cover here, not only to the inauguration, but a major theme for us this year. On one major theme, I went away. The market dropped 4 days in a row. Sweeney's fault.
Yep.
We lift. Futures up 46, up 0.8%. VIX, I really don't have a good VIX print yet, 17.20. NASDAQ up an exact 1% as well. We're watching currencies with a stronger dollar this morning. We're out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts from New York City. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. U.S. stocks looking to snap a losing streak that took some shine off the S&P 500's best two-year run dating back to the late 1990s. The index surged more than 50% since the start of 2023, and that was thanks to the Bag 7 tech mega caps. I want to check in with a few of them. We have Apple, little change. Microsoft up about 1%. Same for Alphabet. Meta up more than 1%. Same for Amazon. Chip stocks advancing ahead of the opening bell. This is after ending 2024 on kind of a downbeat note. We have NVIDIA up more than 1.5%. Advanced Micro Devices up more than 1%. Broadcom up more than 2%. Let's go to NASDAQ futures up 0.9%, 208 points. Dow futures up 0.6%, 296 points. And S&P futures up 0.7%, 46 points. The two-year yield 4.22%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.52%, down 4 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude up more than 1%, $75 a barrel. WTI crude $72 a barrel. We have spot gold higher, $2,638 an ounce. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.1%, and Bitcoin up more than 2% at just over 96,000. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. On foreign exchange and on the Bloomberg Launchpad, I've got probably 15 currency pairs lined up. And I don't know which one's most important. I got to talk to somebody smart about that. You know, I mean, Child Friedman over in London and the rest of them. But I'm sorry, the dollar's walking away.
Yeah,
I mean, that's all there is to it.
No stopping it.
Euro parity, I guess we're on the Euro parity watch. We haven't done a 102 yet, but
it was nice for you.
Almost there, 1.0317.
Yeah, your dollar.
I would have stayed in Paris if we popped parity.
I know, exactly.
They're
paying you to stay.
It was amazing how reasonable it was compared to New York City.
Right.
I mean, shockingly better prices than New York City. Top to bottom.
If you can get a room.
Joining us now, Sarah Hunt, with us with Alpine Saxon Woods. I want you to talk about how people feel. SPX up 23-24%. Some of the Mag 7 mutual funds up 35%, whatever. And people doing 60-40, I don't know where they were. Somebody told me another lousy year for bonds. I don't know. What total return is the break point where I feel good this year? 15%?
That's a great question. I would say that's high. I would say that.
Really?
I would say that's high. Well, I mean, feel great. So you've had 2 years of really good returns, right? So the concern for me would be, or in general would be, well, we just don't want to have something that goes negative. We don't want to take those returns away. But I think if you got somewhere around 8, 9, something that was higher than what people think of as the average, and yet not nearly as punchy as we've had for the last couple of years, I think people would feel pretty okay about that. I think the concern is after back-to-back, it's tough.
I mean, Paul, jump in here. I mean, I looked at one statistic, and I'm catching up, folks, mon Dieu. I looked at one statistic where 400x gazillion walked out of large cap equity funds when I got on the plane to France.
I know.
Like a lot of money walked away from blue chip America, Paul.
Yeah, and I think there's a run up right after the election, and a little of that maybe peeled off right there in the last couple of weeks of trading here. But I mean, if we're going to have high single digit returns, I know I'm looking at the street that's got double digit earnings growth, so it's really implying a compression of the multiple out there. Is that something that you think is reasonable or should happen?
I think that if the compression of the multiple comes, it's going to come because the E is moving up and not because the multiple's coming down, but there's some natural compression on the other side there. And I think part of that is you've got to grow into some of these expectations, right? Because that's where I'm thinking that it's hard to look at double-digit returns, and it's good to think that you could get high single-digit returns and maybe even move into that. The flip side would be if you get enough things to be worried about that you don't, that things start to look much scarier than they do right now. So that's kind of where we're thinking.
And the market seems to be discounting, I guess, just 2 interest rate cuts this year. Can the market move higher with that type of interest rate environment, or do we need more? Like Cam Harvey from Duke University was just on saying he thinks should be 5 cuts.
And saying it enthusiastically.
Right.
But I would say that the good news is we've pared it down to that expectation, and that then if it goes up again, that will help. you've seen those expectations move around so quickly that it's difficult to say, what the market expects is what we're going to get, because we haven't every single time it's changed. So I think that the fact that we're down to a lower number of cuts is actually better than if we were still sitting here at 5 or 6.
There's a return of the fancy stocks, and everything else, I guess 3-year track record was basically flat. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Should those managements change to worship free cash flow like the successful stocks? Are you observing managements grinding it out at Alpine Saxon Woods day after day? Are you seeing a change to a new worship for the free cash flow of Apple or the others?
I think that management started looking at that as soon as you started to see interest rates get up off that zero bound. Whether or not they can actually pull that through has become the question. So really one of the things that we look at very carefully is, are you managing to have positive free cash flow? Because in an environment where rates are not coming down as fast as Cam Harvey would like them to do, then you also have to look at what can happen going forward, and I need to see that cash. And if you haven't been able to do it by now into this point, I think that it's much more problematic to be looking at those balance sheets.
People seem pretty optimistic about President-elect Trump and what he means for the economy, what he means for markets, whether it's for lower taxes, maybe some deregulation, easier on the M&A front. Does that suggest we can then move away from these big tech names and think about more cyclical areas of the economy? Is that a theme for 25?
I think we're going to stick with some of the themes that have already occurred. So if you think about thematic investing, right, you think about what happened with utility space, with some of the industrials, everything that's moving into this area where technology is going to need more resources, that I think can continue. And I think the question really becomes, what happens to the rest of the economy? And I think that's what people are really looking for, that broadening out that we've been talking about for 2 or 3 years. We're going to get the broadening out, and then the Russell gets slammed in the last month of December. I think that people are looking for that mid-cap catch-up. And that's where, again, those balance sheets become very important, because those are companies that can't afford to be continuously borrowing money.
I don't leave the name out of it. I got a venerable large cap trading at a 21 multiple. They're popping a 2.2% dividend with 3% dividend growth. None of this rings Mag 7 at all. They got nice weighted average cost of capital, nice ROIC, but they're not in that glory group. How do they get to that glory group? PR or executive statements? How do the losers become the winners of Mag 7?
Well, the most interesting thing that you said about that is they're sitting there with a 20 multiple. That would have been a high multiple in other years, right? The fact that our multiple expectations have moved up so much on the industrial space, in other spaces, I think the way that rest of that catches up is that the rest of the market continues to stay higher, and people start looking for things that look relatively less expensive. And I think this year you're going to see a lot of people, it's not so much about looking for the value stocks versus growth, but where can I get growth that doesn't look unreasonably priced? And that's going to be, I think, a thing for 2025.
30 seconds, share buyback. I mean, there's just got to be a new formula for really well-run companies with lousy multiples to join the haves of the stock market.
And raising those dividends and buying back those shares is a big way to do it.
That's what Paul's big on. It's raising the dividend.
It's capital return. We do that.
We got to get the guy from, I think it's New, I can't remember, Federated.
Yeah.
I don't have it in front of me, folks. He's got a book out. It's the Sweeney Bible. Shut up and raise a dividend.
Yeah, I'll say that to Tim Cook every time I see him down in Duke, and he just ignores me. He says, I got better seats.
He just wants you to write a bigger check.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what he's
yeah, exactly.
He and Rubenstein are tag teaming you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Sarah, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you. Great
Everybody else is like, home, hungover. Again, Dan Paris. Thank you, Ari. Thank you so much for once again saving the day. Daniel Paris with a wonderful monograph on dividends are more important than share buybacks. I don't know if I agree with that, but that's what he says. Paul, the tape's up.
Tape is up.
It's like the first day of the year.
Yeah, we had some, while you were away, Tom, it was a little shaky while you were just kind of relaxing at the cafes. We had a little bit of sell-off there right towards the end of the year. Not a lot of volume. Nothing really got your attention that much, but here we are with the S&P futures up 0.7%, the NASDAQ up 0.9%, and the yields coming in just slightly, Tom. Your 10-year Treasury, 4.51% if you want to invest in the U.S. government.
I'm in their Cafe Saint-Regis.
Yeah.
A cigar. Yep. Beverage of my choice. It's 35 degrees out, and
Burgundy.
Notre Dame is in the difference.
Yeah.
Notre Dame was really something.
Oh, so how is it?
We went.
We'll talk about that.
We'll talk about it. Notre Dame, very emotional.
I never thought I'd see it come back. Wow.
Futures up 41 across America. Stay with us. Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures advancing on the back of optimism over tech stocks. We'll get to NASDAQ futures up 0.9%, 194 points. Dow futures up 0.6%, 283 points. S&P futures up 0.7%, or 43 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.20%. That's down 3 basis points. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.52%, and that's down 4 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is up about 0.1%. Economic data picking up back after the holidays. We're just getting in initial jobless claims for last week. The survey was for 221,000, came in a little bit lower, 211,000. The week before, the revised went up to about 220,000. So that's the difference there. Later this morning, there's more on tap. We get manufacturing PMI, construction spending. Tomorrow, it's a report on ISM manufacturing and also light vehicle sales. Want to end with a company making news. That's Alibaba. It's agreed to sell its controlling stake in Chinese hypermarket operator Sun Art Retail Group. It's a $1.7 billion deal. Alibaba down about 1% in Hong Kong, but Sun Art taking a hit. Stock slid about 20%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Okay, we're going to start this now, and I'm not going to let up on this. We're doing it tomorrow as well. It's professional sports. The last game of the season,
oh boy,
they sit, the Eagles sit,
yeah,
the number one exciting guy in football.
Saquon, Penn State.
Don't you throw him in like for one quarter?
So we can get the rushing title.
Or just whatever. I mean,
no, you don't want to risk these guys getting hurt in a meaningless game. Sure. They're getting ready for the playoffs. This is their bye week for a lot of them. So that's what's going to happen. The Giants, no idea.
Eagles, the Giants could win. They go from the first round draft pick to the 47th.
Exactly. True Giants fashion. Yeah, we'll see. I have to see. They need a lot of help, the Giants. So
I would put them in for a couple plays. Tell the other team they can't tackle him.
All right. Well, he says, I don't need to get the season rushing record.
So he's got a good attitude on this.
He's the best. He's the best.
Okay. We need to get that out of the way. Julia Pollack said, talk some football talk before you go to me. Joining us now, my fave on the left coast, chief economist, ZipRecruiter, Julia Pollack on her labor economy. Julia, there's a bifurcation in America. We call it the haves and the have-nots. Color for us the have-nots that ZipRecruiter observes in a tough labor economy.
So this has been a very interesting labor market. It has cooled and will likely to continue to cool through early 2025 and narrow. And as a result, beyond that, the amount of churn in the labor market, the amount of hiring, the amount of quitting, the amount of job switching, that's cooled even more than the top line job growth and unemployment figures would suggest. And so it is a labor market where you're not very likely to get laid off. You have unprecedented job security if you already have a job. So if you have a job you like, you are a have. And if you don't have a job, or if you're stuck in a job that you don't like, you're a bit of a have-not. You don't have a good alternative. And there's just way too little hiring going on for you to feel confident about getting something better.
Julia, how do some of your clients, your corporate clients, how do they view maybe some upcoming changes to immigration policy, to maybe forcing some people out of the country? How does that impact kind of the labor market? Because there is a narrative out there that migration, both legal and illegal, has created a lot of workers that are needed in this economy.
Yes, so there are industries where immigrants, both legal and illegal, are very, very heavily overrepresented relative to the rest of the workforce. Areas like elder care, construction, restaurant work, and yes, immigration likely reduces labor costs there and increases job growth, not just for immigrant workers, but also for native-born workers. So yes, there are many employers who are worried that labor will become more scarce in the new year, and that they'll have to raise wages or do something.
Julia, two questions. Let's talk economics first. What happens when we model out a 5.0% unemployment rate? What actually occurs?
Well, the issue is going from where? So we're at 4.2%. If we go to 5% this year, that would be a recession. That would trigger the Somme rule, and an increase like that would likely trigger further increases. So you probably wouldn't stop at 5%. You'd probably go to 7%. It really depends on your starting point. A 5% unemployment rate has been great in previous times of history, but now it would represent quite a rapid deterioration.
Julia, I'm at CDG. Lisa, I'm trying to have an orange juice. Menno, Orangina. All they have is Orangina. I love Orangina. I couldn't get a real orange juice. I have Orangina. And I thought of you, Julia Pollack, sitting in Paris, because the Wall Street Journal, Rachel Wolf had this great article, and American 30-somethings increasingly bypass the traditional milestones of adulthood. It was like this article was written for ZipRecruiter. Are 30-somethings as lazy as Rachel Wolf said in the Wall Street Journal?
No, she didn't necessarily say they were lazy. I read that article, and she talked about how many of them just can't achieve their goals in this economy.
Come on, you're killing me. Their idea of a minimum wage is $200,000. Let me channel Lisa Mateo. Go get a job. Right?
Well, no, so what she was saying was that the problem is many of these young people want to live on the coasts. They want to live in Los Angeles and New York. And there, housing affordability has become markedly worse over the last few decades because there's no building. There's no increase in supply, but young people still want to be there because the jobs are there. Many Americans are moving to lower cost places. Obviously, one can afford to buy a house in much of the country, right? It's not necessary to be so cash strapped as we are here in Los Angeles or New York City. But there are studies showing that those workers who have remote jobs and who've moved to, say, Tulsa or, I don't know, the middle of Tennessee or whatever, and now have a $200,000 5-bedroom house, if they lose their tech job, it's much harder for them to find another one than if they are still in Los Angeles or New York. So there are some career costs to leaving those goals behind.
This is really important deal. For those of you not on YouTube, you can't see Sweeney's physically shaking over this. Your kids are like poster child success of this.
Well, they're all employed.
They're all employed.
Yep. And so far so good.
Do you pay their phone bills?
I still pay. And this is a story. I still
Do you pay health insurance?
No, they're doing their own things. But I've got them pretty much off the dole here. But two of the three are in large cities. So that's kind of where you have to be, arguably.
And you're still paying their phone bills.
Yes.
You're a loser.
Exactly.
I'm even worse, Lisa.
Exactly. So what are your clients saying, Julia, as we start a new calendar year? We're 5 years on from the pandemic. Are people back in the office? Are people not back in the office?
Question.
Have we found a new normal here? Is it 4 days? Is the new 5 days? Where are we on that?
Very interesting. We just did a large employer survey, and about 1/3 of employers said that they pulled back on remote work opportunities, and about 1/3 said that they had expanded remote opportunities. And so companies are moving in opposite directions, and they're doing what works best for their particular tasks and industry. There's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to remote work. In the aggregate, remote work is pretty stable. We're not seeing a massive return to office. The companies that have introduced return to office policies in many cases haven't quite seen them through. And when they get pushback from workers, they sort of quietly, cut out certain workers and carve out exceptions.
Joy, what's the outlook for wages in 2025? We've seen some pretty solid wage growth over the last 3 or 4 years. Is that expected to continue in 25?
Yeah, I mean, so many economists do expect the wage growth will moderate a bit. In our survey of employers, we found that employers, by and large, the vast majority expect to increase pay, and about a quarter expect to increase pay more than 5% this year. So employers are still feeling quite a lot of wage pressure, possibly because labor force participation is falling. Even before the Trump administration coming in, it's falling because of an aging labor force. It's falling because immigration has already slowed down a bit. And so employers are looking at sort of labor shortages as far as the eye can see.
Don't be a stranger. Love it. Julia Pollack, thank you so much, from the Left Coast and ZipRecruiter, with a really twisted and different view on the American labor economy. Futures up 50, down futures up 326. VIX coming in a little bit, but I'm going to suggest more happening. 17.09. Program note, Saturday, February 22nd. Tigers, Phillies.
Wow.
Spring training. He'll be there with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. We're learning more about the victims when the driver of a pickup truck in New Orleans sped onto Bourbon Street that was packed with New Year's Day revelers. At least 15 people were killed, including an 18-year-old girl dreaming of becoming a nurse, a single mother, a football star, and others. Sherelle Jackson's cousin, 37-year-old Reggie Hunter, the father of 2 young boys, was also killed.
They're saying that they were taking extra precaution and doing things with the barriers to make them more secure for the extra millions of people that were going to come into New Orleans in the near, month or two. It's kind of like they dropped the ball.
About 30 people were injured. A separate incident in Las Vegas involved a Tesla Cybertruck explosion outside President-elect Trump's hotel. The blast killed a suspect inside the vehicle and sparked an intense investigation into possible terrorism. Las Vegas Sheriff Kevin McMahill.
There does not appear to be any further threat to our community here now.
Authorities are looking into whether there are links between the attacks in New Orleans and the explosion in Las Vegas. Bloomberg's David Gura has more.
The open question today is there a connection between the two of them? And that's certainly something that's the focus of the FBI. The FBI last night in a statement said they expect to be finished with their part of the investigation into what happened in New Orleans. Today, they're going to hand that over to local law enforcement more fully.
Bloomberg's David Gura. In South Korea, demonstrators supporting and opposing impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol held rival protests near the presidential residence today as he faces an unprecedented arrest over his short-lived martial law attempt. Yoon, in a defiant message, vowed to fight to the end against anti-state forces. The peak of the first meteor shower of the year may be visible during a 6-hour period tonight into tomorrow morning. The quantritids will be the brightest as Earth reaches the densest part of the cosmic debris from an asteroid that began streaking through the skies the day after Christmas. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Paul, my chart of the year is the bond market, because I think the recovery down 6 standard deviations, almost a huge collapse of bonds in 2022, price down, yield up big. And then we came back, but we sort of kind of like rolled over Q4. Price down, yield higher. We all know that. Mm-hmm. And what's amazing, off the long-term trend, we're still 4 standard deviations off of the joy where we were in 2021.
Yeah, the folks we talk to on the rates, Tom, they say, get used to it. I mean, we're higher for longer. We're more normalized now, where we've historically been. This feels a little bit more like a new normal. It doesn't feel like if you're trying to shop your mortgage rates, Tom, that you're going to go get a 4% mortgage anytime soon.
Bob Michael with us on the Fed show with JP Morgan, and he says he still sees price up, yield down.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a basic JP Morgan.
Well, the Fed,
call.
we'll see how aggressive the Fed is this year, Tom. I mean, the market's pricing in 2 cuts for calendar year 25.
Yeah.
We heard Professor Harvey from Duke University talking about
He was
should be
tough.
4 or 5, so that's what
I
the
mean,
data.
Paul and I look at different 30-year mortgage rates, and the one I look at happens to be at 7.28%.
Oh boy, yeah, I'm not going
That's
there.
not 6.99%, is it?
No, and that those things, again, some of the experts say if you feel like you can get it back down to 6%, that might free up some sellers in the marketplace. That might be the new normal for some of these homeowners here and home buyers.
Yeah.
I don't know.
July 3rd, when you were off for 4 days.
Yes.
July 3rd, 7.33%. So we're almost back to where we were July 3rd in terms of, the bank rate 30-year mortgage.
Absolutely.
I'll have to see. Futures up 51 right now. The VIX 17.06. We're on YouTube. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures higher as we kick off the new year. We've also had more economic data after the holidays. Initial jobless claims fell to an 8-month low to end 2024. New claims fell by 9,000 to 211,000. Continuing applications fell to a 3-month low. NASDAQ futures up more than 1%, 213 points. Dow futures up 0.6%, 294 points. S&P futures up 0.7%, 46 points. The 2-year yield 4.21%, down 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.53%, down 4 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude up more than 1% at $75 a barrel. WTI crude $72 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.1%. We have the Japanese yen up 0.2%. The euro down 0.3%. The British pound down almost 1%. And we have Bitcoin just above 96,000. Few stocks on the move. Nomura Therapeutics, they're down 83%. The company's experimental drug will have failed to show a benefit in a final stage study for treatment of a major depressive disorder. And shares of Topgolf Callaway rose more than 7%. 3, 2. Topgolf Callaway. There we go. After an upgrade from Jefferies to buy from hold. And if you got hit with an airline delay over the holidays, well, Cirium is out. It has its 2024 annual on-time performance list at the top. 86.7% of flights arriving on time, Aero Mexico. It's not your France airline that you mentioned earlier, no. Second place, Saudi Arabian Airlines, and Delta Airlines actually came in third, and that was despite the CrowdStrike software debacle. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Let's do that as newspapers tomorrow. Expand that out. That's
Yes.
very cool. People really care. How's EWR, Paul? I mean, how much of your life have you wasted in 2024?
I tell you,
on the tarmac.
I have to give it. The tarmac is an issue, but Terminal A is a gem.
It
so
is.
they hit a home run on that Terminal A. I think they're now redoing Terminal B. So I think it's a similar to what we heard from folks about, LaGuardia and.
Well, LaGuardia is the shining light here for those of you across the nation. LaGuardia is just a miracle, and they're doing $19 billion or something at JFK.
Yeah.
Terminal 1, like Lawrence Summers once said, it looks like a third world country. It's so bad, but they're rebuilding it.
Yep.
I mean, they're getting there.
Yep. So again,
we're rebuilding America. Joining us right now, and this is going to be a great theme this year, with Wendy Schiller. What an advantage! Speaking to her at Brown University. And Wendy, my book for the inauguration is Pearson and Schickler out at Berkeley and their spectacular effort on polarization. And I know Jeff Shapiro, when he was in economics at Brown, was leading the way on this as well. When we look at that podium, that floor of dignitaries on January 20th, has there been any time in America where we are as polarized in what we're going to see at that inauguration?
Well, I mean, I think it really depends on the scope of federal government, Tom. I mean, obviously, the difference now for polarization is that it used to be absolutely shaped by party bosses and politicians running for office in the late 19th century. Very divided country on core issues like trade politics, monetary policy, and of course, the repercussions of Reconstruction after the end of the Civil War. So we had real differences. But the scope of government was so much smaller that we didn't feel those differences in every aspect of our lives. And we didn't have really the scope of information dissemination that we have today, even though we had very strong control of newspapers and media, not that many people could read. So everything was sort of filtered in communities. Now everybody has a device in their hand, constantly receiving information that can be manipulated by a lot of different people to actually shore up the divide. So I think the pillars that make us more divided have become strengthened, but not by party regulars, as we see, or party bosses, but by individual independent actors like Elon Musk at Twitter, formerly, X known as Twitter. So that's what, Pearson and Schickler are known. Schickler's known for polarization in politics, Pearson for social policy. And what they're saying is that this has just infected all of the fabric of everything the government does in a way that we haven't seen before.
Paul, I can't say enough. They devote 2 chapters in this monograph to the media. And I'm going to state it right here, folks, for 2025. Matt Winkler invented this at Bloomberg. We're trying to go down the middle. I fail at it. Lisa Mateo fails at it on a daily basis. Barr, we don't even, he's out of control. But Matt Winkler invented this. We're going to kill ourselves to go down the middle on our politics.
Wendy, is there a opportunity as you look forward and maybe just think out loud, is there an opportunity for some political entity to truly be bipartisan and unify this country? Is there a candidate out there that could actually do that, do you think? Or is it just too firmly entrenched here?
I think what we'll see, really, Paul, when you think about the next couple of months under the Trump GOP trifecta, is the importance of the size of majority. And of course, Eric Schickler has that, and a woman named Sarah Binder at Brookings and GW University also has written quite a bit about that. This is going to be crucial to pushing towards bipartisanship. When you have a tiny majority, as the GOP does, as we're about to see in the fight for the speakership, when you have that, you have to have bipartisanship. You literally cannot function without it. And the more that the Congress, particularly the House, is forced to engage with each other to pass anything, that spills out into all of us by producing bills that are in the middle, as Tom suggests. So that is crucial. You actually, in some cases, want a very tight, slim majority because it forces bipartisanship. I don't think it'll come from a single individual on the outside. It's going to come from compromised public policy.
Okay, we got a Louisiana Speaker of the House. I think a lot of Americans really don't know who he is, like me. But the answer is this guy supported President-elect Trump in saying the election wasn't this, or, you know the drill, Professor Schiller. What's he looking at Friday? Is he a layup to retain the speaker appointment?
No, I mean, I think, obviously Thomas Massey is sort of trying to jump in from Kentucky, and he's been very vocal. Who knows what Chip Roy will do from Texas? He's positioned himself pretty well now in the House. The problem for the Republicans is that some of them barely won their seats in competitive districts. Some of them lost in places like New York and California because of the right-wing nature of the most extreme wing of the party. And they just have very different electoral incentives. And they don't want to give away the store. And it's interesting to me how they're trying to position vis-a-vis Trump, right? Trump wants Mike Johnson. If they give him Mike Johnson, then what leverage do they have with the president going forward? And remember, they are already looking towards 2026, and they realize that they're likely to lose more seats and possibly the majority. So how do they shore it up? And they just have internal disagreement about what the successful political strategy for them is going forward.
After they do presumably elect a speaker, I guess one of the early issues for this Congress, and particularly the Senate, is to confirm some of these cabinet nominations from President-elect Trump. How contentious is that going to be? Because I haven't heard too much about that in the last few weeks.
Sort of drifted away.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you have to give some credit, at least already, to John Thune, the incoming Republican leader of the Senate, because he's managed to persuade Trump that confirmation hearings are important and that the Senate should vote on all these cabinet nominees and confirm them so they are duly confirmed by an elected body rather than being acting. So that's a small victory for the Constitution and institutions themselves. But now we have these terrible terrorist attacks, and you think about Kristi Noem at Homeland Security, and you think to yourself, is Kristi Noem in trouble now? Does Kristi Noem have what it takes to really run that department? Yes, that's what Trump thinks. We know that the Congress has gone after the Director of Homeland Security in the Biden administration, Mayorkas. So let's just see if more nominations get a tougher hearing because of now some newfound or new threats in terms of terrorism. So the field is changing all the time on what these people have to handle. And the question is, how deep will the Democrats go in their criticism, and which one of these will be the sort of sacrificial lamb in addition to Matt Gaetz, where the Senate says, no, we need somebody else. We're just going to wait and see. And if it's tumultuous in the House, there's far more pressure on the GOP and the Senate to make things go smoothly for President Trump.
Professor, thank you so much, and thank you for your commitment to Bloomberg surveillance. I can't say enough, folks, about the theme forward. It'll be news-based, and the news is going to drive what we do, but this idea of polarization in America really front and center, and of course Brown University academics leading on that across the nation. Futures up 43. I don't know. It's a lift to the market. The VIX giving me some life. The dollar won't give it back. I mean, I'm going to get a 109 on DXY. I'm not there yet.
No, exactly, Tom. And I just note that the Japanese markets are closed, the Nikkei.
I didn't know that.
I'm just looking at that.
157.
Yep, the hash marks there. So the Nikkei index not trading here today in Japan. On the rates, the U.S. rates market, Tom, 10-year Treasury, 4.53% off, about 3 basis points pulling in here today.
Paul and Ringo, we mentioned earlier, they're in a fight. They're in a massive tizzy. Ringo said, I'm not playing on this song, the White Album. The Beatles. Good morning.
Back in the USSR. Been away so long I hardly knew the place. Gee, it's good to be back home. Leave it till tomorrow to unpack my case. Honey, disconnect the phone. I'm back in the USSR. You don't know how lucky you are, boy. Back in the US, back in the US, back in the US.
is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
I'm sorry, it's a boom economy, and that's what we're adjusting to.
Neither party seems to want to take on deficits at all.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr. He'll be in Monday as well after Lions Vikings.
We'll see about that.
Falling on a sword. Lisa Mateo with us as well. The newspaper's a big success. Good morning out on YouTube. Live chat on YouTube. Opining on the beard. For those of you in radio, you are advantaged. Big debate at home. I asked Vet Bill. Vet Bill said keep the beard for one day. Peter from Connecticut emailed and said, when are you losing it?
So we did not shave in Paris? Is that the story?
Yeah, we did not. It's the look.
Sure, I know.
You have the jeton and the
get
black,
your beret on.
the little black beret thing going.
Yep.
You sit out at La Coupole on Montparnasse.
Sounds
It's where all the jazz people hung out. It's like literally where Albert Camus was at the bar the day he won the Nobel Prize. He wrote The Plague in the 50s. And it's like incredible food. Thank you to Les Frenchies for that. But you sit there, and you have to have the non-filter French cigarette that stinks from 3 blocks away.
Sure.
And, we did it, and the beard helps.
I think it does. I keep it for a while, huh?
See ya tomorrow. It's got to be. I got a memo. It's one of those memos from management with a red stripe at the top.
Yep.
You know how that goes.
Yep, exactly.
What do we make of this market, Paul? Up.
I think it's a nice little lift here in the futures market. Half hour to cash trading. S&P 500 up 0.5%. Nasdaq up about 0.6%. So we'll see how it goes.
Breaking news. It's not Mr. Musk at Mar-a-Lago, is it?
No. I mean, Tesla 4Q deliveries. About 495,000. The estimate was about 512,000. So a little light on the deliveries, but if you listen to Elon Musk and his call on Tesla,
it's not about $10.
Don't worry about the cars. It's all about AI. It's all about the robo-taxi. Don't worry about this bending metal stuff and manufacturing cars. That's so last year.
Down 2.7%. Yep. Okay, thanks, Si. That helps. But the answer is it's down $10. My fancy support is right where it is now. It's right back to
400.
Support.
Yep.
393. And, we'll have more on that. Is Alex in today, or is she like
Alex is in today. The whole team is back.
So you're doing a combo Bitcoin Tesla?
And we also have to cover oil. I mean, WTI crude oil up 1.6%. Yeah, just under $73 per barrel. And again, I'm watching this show, Landman, on Paramount Network. It's all about the oil and gas business. Awesome show.
Yeah.
And you actually learn about the oil and gas business. And my takeaway, that's a tough business to work.
It's a tough business.
Yeah, those are some serious people out there.
From the Interactive Broker Studios, the Bloomberg Business Flash is Lisa Mateo.
Yeah, we've got futures pointing to a higher open, possible rebound from the 4-day slump at the end of 2024. We'll start with NASDAQ futures up 0.6%, 134 points. Dow futures up 0.5%, 242 points, and S&P futures up 0.5%, 30 points. The 2-year yield at 4.22%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.55%, and that's down 1 basis point. Chinese stocks posted their worst start to a year in nearly a decade. The Hang Seng Index slid as much as 3.1%. We'll head over to currencies where the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is up about 0.2%. Japanese yen up 0.1% at 156.96 against the dollar. Euro down 0.4% at 103.10 against the dollar. We have the British pound down nearly 1% at 124 even against the dollar. Bitcoin up more than 1% at just over 96,000. Bitcoin buying software firm MicroStrategy up 3%. It actually tumbled in the last 4 trading sessions of 2024, so that's on the rebound. And then Coinbase stock also rose 3%. But Tesla shares falling. New fourth quarter deliveries out. You guys just talked about it. A bit lighter than expected, 495,570 in the fourth quarter. Then meanwhile, you have Chinese rival BYD sold a record number of electric and hybrid vehicles in December. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. And are you in tomorrow, Lisa?
I am, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, Lisa will be here. We'll do newspapers.
Okay.
Yeah. I had a request. They said, do more Lisa.
Absolutely.
That's what we're doing
I
for
hear that all the time.
2025. Let's go and do that. We have had a great set of voices today. You sort of say, well, let's coast to Monday, start the New Year Monday. That's not the surveillance way. We're into it right now. We thank all of you, particularly out on YouTube, huge audience on YouTube today, and we thank you for that. Because it is voices like Linda Dussel, she's Senior Equity Strategist, Fed Hermes, in Pittsburgh, and it's a real understanding that you've got to be in the game to succeed. Linda, what do you say to people that have missed this 24-month lift?
Well, good morning and Happy New Year, gentlemen. Thanks so much for having me today. There's no reason to look backward in time. We have to look forward. And you said it, stay in the game. The best performing portfolios historically are from dead people, people that, the heirs don't know that they have that money, that it exists out there. And then when they discover it, did really well because they weren't worried about what's happening today or next week. Just invest for the long term. And in the U.S., the future really is bright.
Linda, the sentiment out there, I think, kind of reflects what you're saying. That in and of itself, I think, concerns some investors, that the sentiment is so positive about this market after the past 2 years that in itself can set up the market for disappointment. What's your response to that line of thinking?
Well, yes, last year was a momentum year that is very rare historically. Only 3% of the years of the last 70 years had momentum being the main factor for the market to move. And as to your point, when they asked in consumer sentiment, how do you feel about stocks in the next 12 months? It was a record high optimism. You don't want to come into a new year with that. What does that mean? That means we'll probably have a correction. And I know this is consensus, but we really could use a correction after the very strong end of last year and the very narrow breadth. And when we talk about the market, we have to always remember how very narrow it is and how, as you just spoke about Tesla, one of the big names, if it pulls back significantly, if any of those do, that could actually give you the correction. Mm-hmm.
Linda, when you say correction, are you starting with a standard 10% number, or in the new do you and Steve Auth amend the percentage change of an SPX correction?
Well, thank you for putting my name with Steve Auth. Steve Auth, my boss's boss, has called things very, very correctly historically, and I think 10% is a great round number that we can use for a pullback in the entire market. But as we together as a team look forward into the new year, you can say that the market's narrow and that the multiples are high. They are high and deservedly high for the big tech stocks. The multiples for the rest of the S&P, you can call it the rest of the 493, mid to high teens. And if you believe, as we do, that inflation has come down a pace, maybe it settles here, and that's okay. You can put together a 7,000 year-end target, which is our target at Federated Hermes.
I mean, Federated, this is an Irish entity. It's not something you're going to buy in Pittsburgh or Topeka. But, Paul, I mean, Steve Auth stumbled this year.
He did.
96th percentile within his class. His 5-year track record is 87th percentile.
Pretty solid there.
He should own the Pirates. If he owned the Pittsburgh Pirates, we'd all do better.
So, Linda, one of the concerns out there, I think, for some investors is that the market, the expectations for profit growth, solid 12, 13, 14% for this year. That seems like a lot. Are you concerned about earnings growth expectations in the marketplace?
Well, the earnings expectations, that number does sound high, and it takes us right back to my earlier remarks, which were that it's a very top-heavy market, and these big AI-related names are going to continue to sell their wares, and you'll probably continue to see some good earnings growth coming from them. And then let the rest of the S&P join in. We missed the recession. That's the key, I think, here is it's very hard to put together a recession outlook for this year. And if you feel that way and you give the top names their due and they've earned it, that we can really very much get to that place with a nice, relaxed growth rate for the rest of the S&P. Yeah, you can put that together.
Linda, thanks for getting us started in 2025. You've got to go to breaking news. Linda Dissel with Federated Hermes. Tesla breaks down and just went to new lows here. Not up to a 400 level, but at 403, and we're now down to 393, down $10. I don't think we're down 3%. We're just about there, but we'll have to, 2.6% is where we are right now. We welcome all of you across this nation. It is the most difficult Thursday, of course. A postponed bowl game in New Orleans. Sport really does not matter this morning. With our news, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The FBI says it recovered the stark black flag of the Islamic State extremist group from the truck that an American man from Texas smashed into New Year's partygoers in New Orleans' French Quarter. At least 15 people were killed, 30 others were hurt. This man was in the middle of it all with his wife. He says they were narrowly able to get out of the way as the truck missed them by a matter of feet.
We were in the middle of the street. The truck was coming right towards us, but luckily we did see it and hear it quickly enough to get ourselves out of the street. But unfortunately, right in front of us, several others did not.
The attack occurred on Bourbon Street, which was filled with New Year's Eve revelers and crowds gathered ahead of the Sugar Bowl college football playoff game. That game has been scheduled for later for today. It was supposed to take place yesterday. The FBI says the driver was a U.S. citizen from Texas and that he was killed in a shootout with police. The agency is investigating the attack as an act of terrorism and said it does not believe the driver acted alone. A separate incident in Las Vegas involving a Tesla Cybertruck explosion outside President-elect Trump's hotel killed the driver and injured 7 others. Elon Musk is suggesting that it could be an act of terrorism linked to the New Orleans attack. Sheriff Kevin McMahill says for now they see no connection between the two, but there are similarities.
Both vehicles, I'm being told New Orleans was rented from Toro and so was ours. That's another coincidence that absolutely is continuing to bear from our investigation that we have to continue to look into.
The New Year's saw a mass attack overseas as well. Montenegro has been beginning 3 days of mourning for the victims of a mass shooting in the Eastern European country. 12 died in the shooting spree, which began at a restaurant. Police say the gunman died after shooting himself in the head. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Thank you, Michael Barr. Greatly appreciate that. It was great to have Mr. Devine with us with 32 years with the CIA.
Yep.
I thought he was really
Great
trenchant.
perspective.
And
Yep.
have Mick Mulroy coming up with the Lobo Institute with all of his public service.
26 years in the Marines.
Well, yeah,
That's
and
a
this is
commitment,
this is the way we roll on surveillance. We're not pontificating and trying to come up with opinions. We're trying to talk to people that actually, whether it's something as horrific as this or things more light. I mean, actually, talk to people that, like we talked to Barr about the Lions. I mean,
Exactly.
He knows, he knows what he's talking about. And the others will have to see.
Yeah, so we'll have to see a big game for the Lions this weekend.
They have the toughest schedule. I mean, nobody earns it to get into the Derby
it'll be
like the
interesting.
Lions. I mean, the Bills, it's a cakewalk. They play the Patriots of Boston.
Yeah, well, by the way, did you see the last game and good old Coach Dan Campbell ran the hook and ladder?
Oh, no, I missed this.
Yes, he did. And the other side was like, what is this? And, yeah, he pulled it off. So expect more of that from this game.
Should the Bills sit their quarterback? Their quarterback, is it Kelly?
No.
Josh Allen, thank you. Josh Allen.
Yeah,
Should they
he's
sit
awesome.
The quarterback
I don't know
like
where they
the
are
Eagles
in
are
the
sitting their
playoffs,
running back?
what that means, but he is fun to watch, I'll tell you that.
Well, I don't think they have anything to really play for. They've gone as much as they can go. So, you're going to probably sit your players.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's going to be fascinating to see the leagues. Again, Mick Mulroy coming up. An important conversation as a nation considers a weekend of violence, a holiday of violence. Futures up 35 from New York City, Bloomberg's surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. U.S. stocks, well, looking to snap a losing streak, took the spotlight off the S&P 500's best two-year run dating back to the late 1990s. Now, the index surged more than 50% since the start of 2023. That was thanks to Mag 7 stocks. I want to check in with a few of them. We have Microsoft up nearly 1%, same for Alphabet. Meta up more than 1%, same for Amazon. But Tesla, down 3% right now, and that's because of its annual EV sales. It fell for the first time in over a decade. Apple shares are actually down now about 0.5%. Chip stocks advancing. That's after ending 2024 on this sort of downbeat note. Nvidia up more than 1%. Advanced Micro Devices up more than 1%. And Broadcom up more than 2%. NASDAQ futures up 0.7%, 149 points. Dow futures up 0.7%, 304 points. And S&P futures are up 36 points. The two-year yield at 4.23%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.55%, down 2 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.1%, and we have Bitcoin up about 1.5% at just over 96,000. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Our team, they did a great job in the last 24 hours. Devine and now Mulroy from the CIA, and of course with Mick Mulroy's public service to the nation and to our military. Mick Mulroy joins the Lobo Institute. Mick, I want to get away from the talking points. People have to come out at press conferences and say the usual. What's really going on away from the media, the lights of the media in New Orleans?
So good to be with you guys. Obviously, a horrible issue to discuss. I think right now, law enforcement and especially the intelligence community is trying to determine whether this was just ISIS inspired, which it seems obviously that it was, or was it ISIS directed? And they're going to be looking at all of this individual's communications, potentially his travel. There's been reports that he traveled to Egypt and traveled to Canada. That doesn't mean that was anything done there, but they're certainly going to look at who he met and why he met them, and to try to determine if there was any direction or any support that was lended by main ISIS, either in Syria or Afghanistan. And I think that's probably where they're looking right now to determine, I guess, ultimate culpability when it comes to this horrendous attack.
Do we have a strategy for lone wolves?
That's a good question because it's very difficult. It's very difficult to determine who's been self-radicalized, as they call it. The only way to really do that, of course, is to try to somehow get an informant into the mix. But when they're self-radicalized, although this individual does look like, according to the FBI, worked with other people, which does indicate that there was some kind of organization that might have gone beyond the actual attacker. Doesn't mean it was, but it's very difficult if it's just one person, which is why it's so hard to stop these, singular people that decide to either get a weapon and shoot up a public place or drive a truck into a public place. But that is what's really trying to be determined right now, and whether there was multiple people involved in this. It does appear from the FBI statements that there were. And then we obviously need to find these individuals, capture them. They are a threat to the public right now.
Mick, is there any reason to believe at this time that there's any connection between what happened in New Orleans and what happened in Las Vegas? Could they be connected at all?
So I know people have talked about the similarities. They both rented a truck from the same company. Both appear to be U.S. Army veterans, which is obviously a horrible thing for any veteran, myself included. That could just be coincidence. But I think they are looking at the connection. There's potential that they served at the same location, at the same base. That doesn't mean they know each other or this is connected. But those similarities seem to be out there. At least they're being reported. And I'm sure the FBI, which is in the lead of this, both investigations, would be looking to see if there was a personal connection and whether there was anybody directing both of them to do this or not. I think it's too early to really have any direct knowledge of whether that's the case.
Mick, in your long career, you've had a lot of experience in the Middle East. We're going to have a new president taking office here in about 18 days. What do you think the policy should be, could be, as it relates to the Middle East, trying to get some resolution there in 2025?
Well, I do think if we look at all the issues that are going on in the Middle East right now, the common denominator is Iran. They, of course, supported or support Hamas. They support Hezbollah. They were basically given free reign in Syria. They support the Houthis in Yemen. I think that is one of the main efforts that the incoming Trump administration is going to focus on. They are likely to go back to what was called the maximum pressure campaign, which is a maximum amount of sanctions, some of whom were withdrawn with the Biden administration. I think they'll all be put back into place and potentially even more strict sanctions implemented. I think that's going to be the biggest shift when it comes to foreign policy. Trying to starve, of course, the Iranian regime from being able to support, say, $1 billion a year is a high estimate for how much they supported Hezbollah, and try to force them back to the table because their economy is essentially collapsing. The real, I think, is at 785,000 per dollar, and they can't even keep the lights on. Essentially, in a country that's main resource is energy. So it is teetering, and I do think the Trump administration is going to try to push them to a point that they'll want to come back to the table on an agreement not to, of course, develop a nuclear weapon.
Mick, one final question. Lisa Mateo and I were talking about this. I mean, Lisa's got to sit with a fam. I got to sit with a fam. Paul Sweeney's got to sit with a fam and try to explain all this. How do you, is the real deal, how do you explain this violence, whether terror-based or not, in America? What do you tell kids? What do you tell people afraid to go on the subway, afraid to go to a bar, etc.?
Well, there's two parts, right? So one is if we adjust the way we live, we're a free country. We have freedom of association, speech, and we need to fight for it. And one of the way to fight for it is to utilize it. So if you start adjusting everything you do based on this, the terrorists win. But then again, it's a very real threat. And in the United States, because of our freedom, and because that freedom includes, the right to bear arms, which means other people could get those weapons. It is particularly troublesome when it comes to these large public events. So you have to make your own decisions, but I think it's a balance between those two. You can't let them dictate your life, them being the terrorists, but you have to be, reasonable and proactive when it comes to your own security. So it really is a balance. We can do better, I think, when it comes to protecting these public events. It's easy to be the Monday morning quarterback and look at everything that they didn't do. But I think collectively, rather than point fingers, we should just take every incident like this, do an after action, find out what didn't work and what did work, and fix what didn't work. And I think that's what we're going to have to do on each one of these events until we make it just so difficult for these terrorists to really be able to carry out these attacks.
Mick Mulroy, thank you for joining us today with the Lobo Institute. We'll have much more on this. Michael Barr covering it tick by tick, and of course David Gura looking at this, a more substantive look to is the big take that we may see here sometime today. Tesla out with, I guess, a disappointment. NASDAQ was up 1%, now Paul up 0.7%. A little bit of a pullback there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get the markets open in just a moment. At least Mateo, that's her job every day to get these markets open. But a little bit of a lift here to the stock market. Here in the bond market, Tom, a little bit of a pullback just slightly on the 10-year Treasury. We're about 4.54% off, a couple of basis points there. And
dollar doesn't pull back. Dollar
No.
resilient.
Yep.
That was last year's word. Are we going to have to be resilient in 2025?
What's the word? Reticent. That could be another word from there. But I'm looking at gold higher yet again here, Tom.
Yeah,
so,
you mentioned that.
Mr. Gartman, once again, giving us his bullish call on gold, proving to be true. And Bitcoin, why not? Up 1.5%, 96,200 on your favorite
925. We're in the realm of the damn Bitcoin review. But where was it like a year ago? The answer is it's gone up.
Oh, jeez. It was just before the election. It was below 50,000.
We say good morning to you. We'll be here tomorrow. We are geared up for 2025. On your morning commute, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. Good morning, Bloomberg 99.1 FM in Washington, up to Boston. Good morning, Boston. What a success we've had. Thank you for the comments. The reach of 92.9 in New England. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. Now, how are we going to kick off the first trading day of 2025? We did have some more economic data for investors to look through. Initial jobless claims fell to an 8-month low to end 2024. New claims fell by 9,000 to 211,000. Continuing applications, they fell to a 3-month low. We are off and running, so let's get started. We'll start with the S&P 500, up 0.5%, 30 points at 5,911. The Dow up 0.6%, 284 points at 42,825, and the Nasdaq up 0.4%, 90 points at 19,401. We head to the 2-year yield, 4.22%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.54%. That's down 2 basis points. We have Brent crude up more than 1.5% at $75 a barrel. WTI crude $73 a barrel, and we have spot gold at $2,647 an ounce. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.1%. We have the Japanese yen up 0.3% at 156.74 against the dollar. The euro down 0.3%, and the British pound down nearly 1%. And Bitcoin just over 96,000 at the open. We're also checking with Tesla shares. They are down 3%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate that. Again, the Dow up 333 points. Levels here. Almost 43,000 on the Dow. 5,900 on SPX. 21,100 on NASDAQ at 100. Tesla pulling back there, particularly on the NASDAQ this morning. Without question, the most quoted economist by other economists this year was Anna Wong of Bloomberg, with great respect for Claudia Sahm, who's had a profound 48-month or 24-month impact here on the labor economy of America. But Anna Wong and the team at Bloomberg Economics have just been killing it. You know, you get a call wrong, you say, well, maybe there's a recession and it doesn't show up. I get that. But the sum of Y equals C plus I plus G plus NX leads you to where are we going? Joining us now, Dr. Wong. Where's our GDP going, Anna, when you take the basic algebra and you plug it in for 2025? Can we sustain 3% real GDP?
Yeah, Tom, most of that 3%, at least 2/3 of that 3% is due to consumption, right? And I think the big question is whether consumption can continue to be resilient as it had been in the last 2 years. And I think the theme for 2025 is, if I have to summarize it by one word, it would be safety. In the last segment, you talked about questioning safety, perception of safety from the tragic attacks in New Orleans. I think for the economy, the question would be, for many people, whether the sense of financial safety net was just a building on a house of cards, or is it for real? So this year, for example, looking at the claims data we received today, continuing claims has fallen. But do you know that the average unemployed American has been unemployed for 23.7 weeks? And the maximum average weeks of benefit is actually 23.6 weeks. That means that continuing claims are falling, not because people are finding jobs more quickly, but because they have exhausted the claims. And another aspect of the financial safety net is Medicare prices. So, older Americans like, okay, I'm 65 now, I could get these cheaper drug prices. But Medicare premium is set to increase by 6 to 7% this year as well. Home insurance, when you get your escrow bill soon for this year, people will be shocked by how much their monthly payment has increased. Student loans credit score, 79% of student loan borrowers have saw their credit score increase during the pandemic, but that's an artificial, thing to do, right? So it's like a lot of things where people thought they're safe.
Yeah,
it would be called questions.
You're living this, Paul. The insurance thing's for real, right?
No, sure, absolutely, across the board here.
The Vespa, it's killing you.
The Vespa is nicely insured. I'm in good shape there. So, given that backdrop, Anna, what should the Fed do this year, and what do you think they will do?
Yeah, I mean, I think what the Fed should do is that the Fed should be responding immediately to what's happening in the economy, which is that the labor market is not looking so healthy because even though layoff rate was low, the hiring rate has plummeted in the last 2 months. And we are seeing decline in hiring in both full-time and part-time. So the Fed should indeed continue lowering rates. However, what we have seen in the last Fed meeting is that a lot of them are baking in these Trump policies where they think will be inflationary. So I think the Fed is risking this policy mistake where they kept the rates overly tight.
Anna Wong, out of your Chicago Combine, you had the privilege of not only Luigi Zingalis on American capitalism, but the giant Raghuram Rajan, his service to India, and also, of course, iconic with the book Fault Lines Off of the Crisis. But I want to go to Rajan's book, The Third Pillar. And the heart of the matter is, of Bloomberg surveillance, is two Americas. How big a divide does Anna Wong see in the two Americas that Raghu Rajan writes about in The Third Pillar?
You know, it's the 60-40 split. The two Americans, you have the 40% who of consumption, which are driven by the wealthy and high income, and they are driving up a consumption because of Bitcoin prices, stock market prices. So as long as the stock market is doing well, that 40% of consumption will be happening. But then you have those bottom 60%, which actually is driven by the lack of safety net that I just mentioned that will be coming into view in 2025. So that said, in aggregate, however, as long as the top 40% of consumption is doing fine, they're driven by those 20% of wealthy Americans, then we are fine.
Paul, to me, this is just like the ginormous question.
Yeah.
Is the mail I get from people saying, Tom, your head's not screwed on correctly at 10022.
Right.
There's an America out there really suffering.
Got to get off this island.
These are yeah, exactly, really tough emails.
Exactly, and that K-shaped economy. And
there you go.
Yeah. And Anna, we had a fellow University of Chicago alum, Cam Harvey from Duke University, on, and he was just pointing out, he was the first one to point this out to me several years ago, about how big the interest on the debt is, and it's something we got to focus on, but nobody has a political will to do so. As an economist, how concerned are you about deficits and the national debt and the service of that national debt?
Yeah, so in our projection for fiscal deficit going out to 10 years out, we are projecting that by 2028, thereafter, half of the fiscal deficit, so at least 4 percentage point of GDP would be due to debt servicing, so an interest payment. However, if the Fed actually cut rates by 200 basis points in the next 2 years, that will actually tremendously reduce the interest payments for the national debt in the future. And as we have seen in the past year, the Treasury actually issued a lot of the supply in the shorter end of the bill, so they do need to refinance it. Right. So a lot of it will depend on how the Treasury decide to manage that debt. We did hear from Scott Bessent that he plans to issue more on the longer end. So that would not be as much cost saving for the national debt if he chooses to follow that strategy.
One final question to get started in the year, Anna Wong. When you put the Bloomberg economics team together, what's the single thing you guys argue about the most? What's the academic tension in Bloomberg economics of the guesstimate of the American economy forward?
I think the biggest tension is really, is there a cost to be paid by huge fiscal deficits? And that was the debate in the last couple of years. Right, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So if the economy is resilient because of massive stimulus, with the MMT, people be right that ultimately the cost is actually not there? Or is it just as economic textbook would say, which is that government spending does crowd out private investment, and eventually the economy will have to slow?
Anna, thank you. Anna Wong with us. Congratulations on a stellar 2024. Old news, nobody cares. We got to move on. Anna Wong in 2025 will be important. NASDAQ 100 up 1%. What, Paul, an hour and a half ago?
Yeah.
It just turned red on the screen.
Yep.
So the market pulling back from the morning's enthusiasm. That on Tesla. Dan Ives out on Twitter with Bloomberg this morning. Dan Ives calling it a respectable number forward he would buy on dips. That's Mr. Ives' discussion, not mine. Our discussion today is to speak to Jack Devine and Mick Mulroy about this violence in America with an update with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Federal investigators are pouring through every detail of the New Orleans truck attacker. The U.S. military veteran drove a rented truck through the French Quarter, killing 15 New Year's revelers and injuring 30 others. Bloomberg's Derek Wallbank has more on the identity of the deceased suspect in New Orleans.
Shamsuddin Jabbar, 42 years old, an American citizen, had served in the U.S. Army, born in Texas. Biden said that Jabbar had posted videos on social media expressing a desire to kill.
Bloomberg's Derek Wallbank. In a separate incident, investigators in Las Vegas are working to figure out if there was any connection between a Tesla Cybertruck that exploded in the valet area of the Trump Hotel on Wednesday and the attack in New Orleans. Sheriff Kevin McMahill says the make of the truck prevented damage and the windows of the hotel next to the blast didn't even shatter.
The fact that this was a Cybertruck really limited the damage that occurred inside of the valet because it had most of the blast go up through the truck and out.
Sheriff McMahill says the driver was killed. Impeached South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has issued a defiant statement to his right-wing supporters gathered outside his residence in the capital of Seoul. He vowed last night to fight to the end against what he called anti-state forces. Global news, 24 hours a day. Back to you.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it this morning. Into the new year, and we'll look at equities, bonds, currencies, commodities. I said this to Paul when he wandered in at 6:42. You okay over there? You're getting emotional about Lions Vikings, are you?
Sneezing and
sneezing. Okay. Have some of Lisa's.
I'm going to step out for a second.
Yeah, step out for a moment. Have some of Lisa's mimosa on the way out.
Herbal tea and stuff. I don't know what she's doing over there.
Herbal tea. I mean, we're in France, and Mrs. Keene's getting green tea. I'm like, come on.
No.
You're kidding me.
A hot toddy, that'll
Yes, we enjoyed that as well.
A little burgundy.
Yeah.
First thing I said to you, Paul, this morning is we got to do more FX here. We need more Jane Foley. We need more Jordan Rochester. We need George Saravellas.
Yeah.
To me, folks, currency last year really wasn't part of the debate. I'm thinking this year it's more so.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to be higher for longer here in the U.S. in terms of rates, that suggests a higher dollar for the most part, for resilient dollar. We've got the Bank of England, in the ECB, they're cutting rates. Japan, on the other hand, is raising rates.
Okay.
But I mean, boy, look at the yen. They should be raising. I mean, 156.95. I mean, we're back on a 160
When do they
watch.
defend the yen?
Yeah,
is what it comes.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm looking at sterling, which nobody's mentioned today, breaking 124. This is a weaker pound sterling, 123.96. Parity for the sterling's like a 119. Has anybody said? Do we get pound sterling cable down to a 119?
Yeah,
I've never framed that in my head.
We'll see. But I mean, you saw it real time in Paris. Your dollar's going a long way at the cafes and at the Louvre and all those great places.
It definitely tick to tick. It was very reasonable.
Yep.
Like everything. It's really.
How are your accommodations? Because I know you're usually at the very.
I couldn't get a hotel room. I mean, I talked to Charlie Pellet. You're up on $5 a day. He had me out in Fontainebleau, halfway to Marseille. We were on Ile de Saint Louis, wonderful hotel. It was packed and great, and it's like they're doing it right.
They know what they're doing over there.
Right now, the Dow up 177 points from New York City. Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, the tech-heavy NASDAQ pulling back just a little bit from earlier. This comes after Tesla's annual vehicle sales dropped and fourth quarter deliveries were lighter than expected. Tesla shares now down more than 4%. So let's check in right now. The NASDAQ up about 0.1%, only 22 points. The Dow up 0.4%, 208 points. The S&P 500 up 0.2%, or 15 points. We have the two-year yield at 4.23%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.55%, and that's down 1 basis point. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up about 0.1%. The euro fell to the weakest against the dollar in over 2 years. Right now, the euro down 0.3% at 103.16 against the dollar. The British pound down nearly 1%, and we have Bitcoin up more than 2%. At just over 97,000. More economic data out. S&P Global U.S. Manufacturing PMI. The survey was for 48.3, same as the prior read. Came in a bit higher at 49.4. In about 15 minutes from now, we get a read on construction spending. Few stocks on the move. Nomura Therapeutics, it's down about 80%. The company's experimental drug had failed to show a benefit. Final stage study for treatment of a major depressive disorder. And finally, shares of Topgolf Callaway nailed it this time, up 17% after an upgrade from Jefferies to buy from hold. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Yeah.
I'm speechless. I'm just thinking of Lisa.
Callaway.
Lisa out on the course with her Callaways.
No, not
See, the
happening.
thing about the Top Golf thing is you can just have a cocktail, hit a couple balls.
I saw. Has it been successful?
Yes, it's really brought. I think it's brought a lot of new people into the game because it's just fun.
Do you golf, Tom?
Here's my golfing history.
boy.
I used to caddy, actually at a really high level. My golfing is we get to the third hole, and they would pay me to leave the golf course and go have a Jenny Cream ale.
Yeah,
I kid you not. They would pay me to leave the golf course. That's how bad I am. And my grandfather, there's a whole family thing, and we'll forget about that. Right now, David Gura with us. He's had an exhausting day just trying to stay up with the story of violence across America. David, what have you learned in the last 60 minutes?
Well, we've heard from a number of people that President-elect Trump has picked to be his advisors on national security issues on television this morning. They've been briefed. They've been in communication with the White House. It sort of highlights this moment that we're in the transition period where the incoming president's team is working closely with the administration to try to figure out what's happened here. But we're still trying to learn more about what connection there is, if any, between these two attacks, the one that took place in Las Vegas and the one that took place in New Orleans. And obviously it rattled a lot of people in those two cities and across the country, pushing ahead to inauguration and other big events here coming up.
I refuse to call it anything but Doge, the Doge duo. Do they want to cut the funding for CIA, for FBI, for Homeland Security? What does Elon Musk want to do with those institutions?
Well, they've talked about cuts across the board. I think the more interesting figure here is Kash Patel, who was a close advisor to Donald Trump during his first term and was in the Defense Department as well. He's been picked by the president-elect to be the next head of the FBI, and he's talked in very concrete terms about scaling back the size of the FBI, rooting out those he thinks are overly political, and even moving the Bureau from Washington, D.C., where it's headquartered in that brutalist building across from the Justice Department, outside of Washington, far beyond the Beltway. So it is, when you look at the kind of policy proposals that this president-elect has floated, one of the more radical ones to kind of scale down that agency and move it elsewhere.
Is there any, at this point, I know it's a fluid situation in New Orleans, is there any credible evidence that this was something more than just a lone actor? I know that's kind of the angle they're pursuing at the moment.
A lot of people in law enforcement have seized on this ISIS Islamic State flag that was in the white Ford truck that was used in New Orleans as a sign that perhaps there was something bigger at play here. Whether or not this deceased suspect was affiliated with that group formally or was just inspired by it, we don't know. But I think that is where law enforcement nationally is centering a lot of its investigation right now. To what degree was he inspired by that group? Perhaps worked with that group? What was he watching? Who was he talking to? So you bring up something really key here, I think, in terms of where this investigation goes from here at the national level. Just trying to figure out if it was a lone wolf here, or if there's something larger at play. And of course, over these last few weeks, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we've seen other attacks like this, and even going back to Charlottesville, we had a vehicle attack there. This is something that I think a lot of folks in law enforcement, in counterterrorism, are taking more and more seriously. The fact that, yes, sure, in New Orleans there were these improvised explosive devices that were found, one of which was in the vehicle, others were found in the French Quarter, we gather. But this means of using a vehicle, using a car, using a truck to inflict harm and to kill innocent bystanders is something that we're seeing folks affiliated with terrorist groups using more of these days.
And you just wonder, I mean, in New Orleans, I guess they were servicing barriers or, I don't know the details, and I'm not saying that anybody failed, but, is Mick Mulroy, I don't know if you heard it,
Yes,
David, within your media traipse this morning, but Mick Mulroy was eloquent about this is America, this is the price. Tell that to parents worried about the next gathering wherever.
Yeah,
I mean,
and it's not difficult to imagine what that night was like. Yes, in New Orleans, which we know is a place people go to, especially on New Year's Eve to celebrate. But that late in the evening, that early in the morning, as you say, a lot of young people are there. The fact that the Sugar Bowl is taking place in New Orleans drew even more people to the city. It is a place people come to relax and party, and that's what was happening there. To sort of think of the carnage that was wrought on top of that is just hard to fathom.
David, switching a little bit to the political front here. House is going to elect a speaker on Friday. We have President-elect Trump endorsing Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Is that enough? Or what do we expect?
Who knows? Having been through this crisis over government funding just a couple of weeks back, in which it seemed like nothing was assured, getting that endorsement was crucial for Mike Johnson, who we should remind everyone wasn't a sure thing when he became the speaker to begin with. We had all of those votes, and he kind of floated to the top and made it through. But the fact that he didn't have the president-elect's support during that debate, I think, was probably alarming to him, alarming to a lot of Republicans. Yes, getting President-elect Trump's blessing here is important, but it is such a diverse caucus of Republicans, and there is such a razor-thin majority here. One wonders if it's assured that he's going to get through when that vote takes place.
Can I switch gears
Sure.
and get away from this immense tension this morning? One of the great tweets of the weekend, and this gets ready for David Gurr's coverage of President Carter's funeral. This is January 9th, scheduled after his Gensler interview, is you had a wonderful vignette about how the gentleman from Georgia had Bill Monroe and Doc Watson darken the White House door. That was extraordinary at the time. I mean, this was before Garth Brooks.
That's true.
It's just as simple as that.
So you had here the father of bluegrass at the White House with Doc Watson, and it's ahead of me going down there for the memorial. I've been reading a lot of Jimmy Carter's works, and he was prolific. He wrote more than 15 books. But when he turned 90, he reflected on his life, and it's interesting you bring this up because it may seem like a silly thing having bluegrass musicians at the White House. But Jimmy Carter, when he left the Navy, moved back to Plains, Georgia, and he and his wife got involved in square dancing and did it at the state level. All the time. He made a lot of friends and a lot of political connections through it. And he credits winning his first political race to the state Senate to the fact that he had friends through square dancing across the state who could marshal support for him in the Democratic Party. And it's how he got into the state Senate and launched his political career. So, yeah, you can laugh about it, oh, wow, blue jeans at the White House. But this actually, there's a long history here. And he said it was crucial, hugely important to him being involved.
And the heart of the matter with the Allman Brothers as well. I mean, he was right in the middle of that massive Jessica. We've had the honor of having Chuck Leavell in the studio here, who wrote Jessica. And I mean, Carter was someone in support of the New South music.
Absolutely, and we'll talk about it.
He didn't listen to REM.
He did not listen to REM. He was not in the Athens scene. But anyways, very important to him, and we'll talk more about his legacy, I'm sure, in the days leading up to that memorial. But just well worth reading to everybody. Was an incredible writer and a great memoirist as well.
Look to the big take with David Gurr, and of course, Mr. Gurr will attend in Washington January 9th. Is to give you coverage of a day in honor of Jimmy Carter, the president dead at 100 here in the recent days. The Dow up 318 points. We here, of course, we look at what we do, and there's got to be one person who's the pivot point to making what we do. And when it's his birthday, Paul Sweeney, time stops.
Time stops.
He says, if you don't honor my birthday, Tom, you won't get that cue.
Yep.
That's what I heard there. We say, happy birthday to Rich Truman. We've not let Mrs. Truman know how much he's lost betting on the Jets this year. Happy birthday to all. We'll be with you tomorrow.